online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 1, I'm Emily Rose Adams. Expert warns that booster jabs every 6 months aren't sustainable in the long run as symptoms for COVID get less severe.
Today, I want to introduce my contract with the British people.
Sir Keir Starmer lays out new plans to try to bring Labour back to power. And Prince Andrew's lawyers make their stand today as Virginia Giuffre's deal with Jeffrey Epstein is made public. The head of the UK's vaccine regulator has warned it's not sustainable to deliver COVID booster jabs every 6 months as Omicron cases continue to rise. Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, who helped develop the Oxford vaccine, says the most at risk should be identified and prioritised instead. He also believes the worst of the pandemic is absolutely behind us. Meanwhile, several hospitals have declared critical incidents following warnings the NHS is in a state of crisis due to staff shortages. The Royal College of Nursing has called for a more cautious approach to COVID measures and for further restrictions in England without delay. Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled his plans to bring the Labour Party back to power as he aims to build on the poll lead they've gained over the Conservatives. In a speech in Birmingham, the Labour leader said his focus will be on security, prosperity and respect, but acknowledged that there is still more to be done to earn the trust of voters. He accused the Prime Minister of not being serious and the Conservative Party of being unfit to govern.
It's the party that is the problem. This is not about the flaws of one individual. It's about the flaws of a whole style of government, the flaws of an ideology, of a political party that's been in power for too long.
A judge in the US will hear arguments from Prince Andrew's lawyers later who want the civil case against him brought by Virginia Giuffre to be dismissed. Yesterday, the details of a £370,000 settlement Miss Giuffre made with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein were revealed. It didn't name the Duke, but suggested any potential connected defendant couldn't be sued. Prince Andrew denies allegations of sexual assault.
If he does escape judgment because the judge agrees with his lawyers, he's still got to face the court of public opinion, which at the moment isn't on his side.
And Novak Djokovic will compete in this month's Australian Open after receiving a medical exemption from a COVID vaccine. The world #1 tennis player has not spoken publicly about his vaccination status, and until now it was unsure if he would be able to compete. And that's your live news on Talk Radio TV. We'll have more news in around half an hour's time.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
A very warm welcome to Tice Talk here on Tuesday afternoon. It's the 4th of January. Many people are heading back to work in the grey, the gloom and the rain, but far too many people, unfortunately, are not heading back to work, and we're going to be talking about that later today. This is my last time standing in for Ian Collins, enjoying his last day of his holidays before he is back with a vengeance, rested, ready to go, raring to go tomorrow afternoon. And we need to be talking today about lots of really important things about the year ahead. In particular, I want to talk about protecting and promoting Britain. We've got so much to be proud of, to feel good about. I don't think we talk enough about that. Obviously, we've got to talk about the latest COVID updates, the cost of living crisis, so much of which is driven, of course, by the cost of energy. How many jabs do you want? 4, 5, 6 jabs? We're going to be talking about that with Dr. Clive Dix. We're going to talk, obviously, about this idea of Sadiq Khan's, about trials for decriminalising cannabis. And there's a really important new law coming in today, which actually I credit the government of, the new National Security Law, much more. We've got some amazing guests. We've got John Redwood MP, Andrew Bridgen, Justin Urquhart Stewart, as well as Dr. Clive Dix. And my big question to you, based on this cost of living crisis, so much of which is driven by the increases in the price of energy, electricity, gas, my question to you is, do you want a referendum on net zero? Because we haven't been asked the question, and yet we, the people, are having to pay the price. Should we have a referendum on net zero? My views are very clear. Yes, it's going to change our lives, but I don't call it net zero. I call it net stupid. But I want your views, your input, because that's what makes a great show. That's what matters. Call us, tweet us, text us 0344 499, text 87222 using the word talk, or tweet at Talk Radio. And of course, if you want, you can watch by downloading the app or on YouTube, Apple TV, Samsung, Roku, Rakuten, the website. So many ways to get involved. Give us a call, send us a tweet. Don't hold back. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Richard Tice on Talk Radio.
Well, I'm looking forward to my last show standing in for Ian Collins. And yesterday I set out what I called my sort of State of the Union address that I think the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom should have been giving. And now I want to just talk about actually how we need to be really patriotic about this great nation that we live in. I don't think we talk enough about true patriotism and how we promote Britain, but also how we protect Britain and the citizens that live within it. And in a sense, these are really, really important issues. And I'm afraid I don't think Keir Starmer's version of patriotism quite gets it. All he wants to be patriotic about is protecting the NHS. We know that actually it's much, much, much more than that. Now, the thing is, for me, Brexit, which meant many things to many people, for me it meant the ability to be a true sovereign independent nation again that could make its own decisions that it felt was right for the UK. And yes, some of those decisions led by our leaders, we'll get some right, we'll get some wrong, but the great thing is that we could make decisions as an independent nation in what we believe is right for Britain. And actually what's patriotically important for Britain. And I believe that much of this success, of course, depends on the quality of leadership making those decisions, but also the quality of the support that our cabinet ministers and our prime ministers receives from advisors, from civil servants and the like. And I talked yesterday that I don't think that support, that advice in many cases is good enough. And that's why I think, for example, that when advisors consistently get it wrong, as have the likes of Neil Ferguson and Sage, frankly, they should be thanked and fired. And there's no better time than a new year to have a new team. Because leadership drives big decisions that affect all of our daily lives. And for me, those decisions need to have a very, very close eye on what's going to protect British citizens, what's going to keep us safe, what's going to keep our jobs here in the UK, what's going to keep our money here in the UK, as opposed to sending hundreds of thousands of jobs to China and hundreds of billions of pounds to China. I don't think that's leadership at all. I'm a believer in free trade, for sure, but it's got to be fair trade with people that respect the rules. And it must be done in a way that doesn't affect our national security. And I'm going to be talking about that later in the show. So promoting Britain, we've got so much to be proud of. Our values, our culture, our creativity, some of our incredibly highly skilled technical manufacturing, our military, our laws. Actually, people respect our legal process. Why? Because we have a great sense here in the United Kingdom, a sense of fair play that is respected around the world. But this requires a self-belief, a level of confidence and a level of courage to lead on this. And promoting Britain as a great place to live and work is about believing in the incredible creativity, the hard work, and also the enterprise. Take, for example, science, biosciences, life sciences, and the real-life example, AstraZeneca, the vaccine, the experts, the scientists at Oxford that developed it here, and we promote that all around the world. And here's the reverse example. Think about President Macron. Just think about how grumpy he was about Astra, a British success story. Why? Because actually he was being, funnily enough, he was being patriotic, and he was a bit grumpy because the French pharmaceutical companies, Sanofi, they had failed consistently in their efforts to develop one of the first vaccines. That's why he was grumpy. In a sense, he was grumpy because he was being patriotic about France. Now, I'm a great believer in enterprise, and I'm a believer in growth. Growth is good. And whatever you think of the American company Apple, whether you use its products or not, hear this extraordinary statistic. This week, the valuation of Apple at about $3 trillion is the same size as the whole of the size or the GDP of the British economy. Just think about that. One company in America, it's valued at the same size, the annual size of our economy. I find that extraordinary. But that's the power of enterprise, but also the importance of keeping ownership of companies, strategically important companies within the United Kingdom. And protecting Britain, it's all about self-reliance on key things. And my goodness, we're learning about that on energy, because sadly we're so reliant on overseas energy, on utilities, water, things like that. Food. 40 years ago, we used to produce 80% of our food. Now, it's less than 60%. Another great Brexit opportunity for our farming community. PPE. I don't want to rely on China. Vaccines. I don't want to rely on India producing the vaccines. I want this to happen here. That's how you protect British people. That's how you protect our jobs, our money, our manufacturing. Because just-in-time delivery, it sounds great until something hits the fan, and you know what I mean. And we're going to be talking later about how you protect key firms. And we've got to also protect British consumers from being ripped off. And I'll also be talking about that, for example, the quantity of parking fines. It may sound small, but it drives us all mad. And again, the quality of our leadership is vital. And when we get bad advice, we need to change it. And I'm sorry, advisors in Sage, you've had your chance. Frankly, it's time to go. Leadership is so critical. We need better leadership, higher quality leadership from our politicians and the advisors. More courage, more confidence, more self-belief in this incredible nation. And my question to you, and I want your calls, 0344 499 1000. The big question of the day is, given that all of the current crisis we face into is driven by the cost of energy and the whole net zero strategy, which I call net stupid, because we could be net smart about this. Do you want a referendum on net zero? I think we can launch a big campaign on this. It's absolutely vital. But send us a tweet, send us a message, call us 0344 499 1000, either on that or anything else that's exciting you, that's giving you enthusiasm, or that's irritating you badly, frustrating you, annoying you. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. Standing up for the little guy.
Full contact, common sense conversation. Smart speaker, smart TV.
We're on your side. Powered by Common Sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, standing in for Ian Collins this Tuesday afternoon. The first day back at work for many, or not back at work for many, because so many are isolating. And we'll be coming on to that just in a second with Andrew Bridgen. But the tweets have already started coming in about net zero, the cost of energy. One here from Carl. I call net zero communism. Whereas Stephen says, if we had a referendum on net zero, the answer would be no, because the question is all important. Yes, we would all vote for cleaner air, but that's not the same as net zero. So yes, the question is important, but the truth is the people haven't been asked. And that is, I think, vital, because net zero involves massive changes to the way we live, the way we travel, what we eat, and how we heat our homes. And that is a massive, massive impact on all our lives. But the biggest impact on our lives today, this week, of course, is about 1 million people, it's believed, are isolating at home. The second pingdemic that we've had. We don't seem to have learnt the lesson from the first one. And we've now got the situation where whole train companies have just given up running trains into London. That's Southern Trains, for example, not bothering until the 10th of January. So I'm delighted now to be joined by Andrew Bridgen, MP for North West Leicestershire, to talk about this, because I know Andrew doesn't muck about, doesn't hold back his words. And a very good afternoon and Happy New Year to you, Andrew. So what's going on here? I mean, I think probably you MPs, you're back in Parliament. Is it tomorrow, Andrew?
Yes, we're back in Parliament tomorrow. I'd be expecting a statement on various COVID measures that have been announced, the masks and restriction or guidance for schools, which will be taken as gospel by schools, as you know, and an update on the Omicron variant's progression through the country. I think the good news is that it's certainly peaked in London. If we've coped with the NHS in London, where apparently a third of individuals have no vaccination whatsoever, that bodes pretty well for the rest of the country, and also a complete vindication of the 101 of us Conservative backbenchers who opposed Plan B.
Completely. And on behalf of all listeners, I think I could probably say, thanks to all of you 101, because actually you gave, in a sense, the backbone, the rod, and also in a sense the challenge to the Prime Minister, which led to him making the right decision, as opposed to the decision that Nicola Sturgeon and Mr. Drakeford made in those respective cousins.
And of course, the absolutely useless opposition we've got in this country, who wanted stronger lockdown measures all the way, Richard.
Maybe we'll have time to talk about Sakir's vision that he announced this morning later, Andrew. But focusing, will you be talking tomorrow in Parliament about the big question, which is the isolation period, because it's still 7 days in the UK. That's better than 10 days. But the US has gone to 5 days. I think France has gone or going to 5 days. In a sense, that's, that extra 2 days is really important if it's considered sufficiently appropriate and safe. Is that going to be on your agenda tomorrow?
Absolutely. And let's be clear on the science. This is a respiratory disease transmitted as an aerosol. If you're self-isolating and you test your nose and your throat and you have no virus particles there, and you do that on 2 consecutive days, I would really like someone to explain the science to me as how possibly, if you feel well enough to go back to work, why you shouldn't, when you clearly are not transmitting the virus if it's not in your airways.
And at some point, we have to have the confidence to move from accepting that actually we're not in a pandemic anymore. We're, in a sense, it's now endemic, and we've got to learn to live with it. And we were doing, I think, relatively well in sort of the last quarter of 2021. Then obviously Omicron rocked up, in a sense, as we expected. There might well be a new variant. That's what happens, for example, in winter. It happened last winter. There was no great surprise. But mercifully, it's milder. Everything proves that it's milder. So now actually it's about leadership, surely, Andrew, to say we've got to get on with it. We've got to start the process of recovery. And where are you on this mass testing, Andrew? of healthy people. I mean, 1.5 million tests, albeit we're running out of them. When does this stop? Because obviously a lot of people are making a great deal of money.
Absolutely. Follow the money, as they say. There's going to be some tough calls coming up for the government soon, and they've got to make the right calls on them, and we're going to get back to some semblance of normality. Yes, Omicron is highly transmissible. That's because it's not a pneumonic disease. It's a disease of the trachea and the bronchioles. That's why your incubation period is less, because it's less invasive to the body. It's why it's less pathogenic, because it's not going down and doing a lot of damage in the lungs. Because it's so transmissible, the peak is going to come very quickly. In South Africa, it was 3 weeks, and it's dropping just as quickly as it came, because it's running out of hosts. Well, there's got to be a point where, in the next couple of weeks, where the government will be in a position where they can say, look, we've peaked with Omicron. It's very mild. For most people, it'll be no more than a cold. We're in a position where the NHS has coped with the peaks. We now can actually get rid of self-isolation altogether and treat it as a mild illness, because we know the NHS can actually cope. And all the science is also showing, which is very interesting coming out of South Africa, that although the Alpha, the Beta and the Delta variant, and to an extent being double jabbed, give very little protection against Omicron, once you've had Omicron, you've got considerable protection against other variants. And I think that's going to be absolutely fantastic going forward. So why would we want to now stop that, keep people in self-isolation when that's the case?
It feels to me that the next couple of weeks is going to be an absolute key battleground between the diminishing number of scientists and certain leaders and doctors within the NHS who are still promoting extreme caution, promoting more restrictions, more sort of semi-lockdowns. But I think they're diminishing in number. And I think some of the journalists, interestingly, who were previously pro-supporting the experts are now questioning that. And I think the growing number of people who said, do you know what, we're done. We've done what we were asked to do. New year, new strategy. We've got to live with this thing. And I think so many people have done what they were asked to do. They've been double jabbed, they've been triple jabbed, and still getting Omicron. I've got lots of friends, Andrew, who've been boosted, and then they've now got Omicron, but they're saying, well, it's a sniffle, it's a cold. So what? I get one of those every year. It's just another one of those.
Well, over time, coronavirus has got to mutate to a position where it becomes much more transmissible and much less deadly. That I think Omicron's a natural progression to that. I mean, a large amount of the common cold that we all get on average 3 times every year, they are coronaviruses, and they probably started out many tens of years ago as lethal as COVID-19 was with the Alpha variant. But they've evolved to be much milder and much more transmissible, and they become endemic. There's nothing we're going to be able to do about that. We don't lock the country down because there's 200 million infections with the common cold a year, and that's the way we're heading with Omicron, thank goodness.
But if we just come on to the NHS within that, because in a sense, it's clearly not being overrun mercifully with Omicron patients. The key issue now, and you notice how the language shifts, we've now got to protect the NHS because of the staff and the potential staff shortages. And so this feels to me, again, the sort of the goalposts are shifting, the goalposts are moving. But again, this is part of it feels it's potentially the last big debate. And
well, as I said,
where does this go, and how do we just get it over the line?
We're going to have to get to a point when once Omicron variant has peaked in London. There's probably a week ago. In the next week, it's going to peak around the rest of the country. Then there's a discussion to be had about whether we need to self-isolate at home. When the NHS has coped, we've gone over the peak, and the virus itself is running out of fresh hosts to infect. Whether the big risk to our country and the well-being and lives is forced absenteeism due to self-isolation. And that's a debate and a big tough call for the government to make, and that's going to come in the next couple of weeks. And that will be a game changer.
And so this really it's a vital sort of 10 days actually for you MPs in Parliament, it seems to me, to encourage the Cabinet and the Prime Minister to make those calls. And look, I always talk about the courage of leadership because, yes, these are big decisions and you've got to weigh up a range of evidence rather than just one bunch of advice from one side of the argument. But I think within that, particularly given the shortage of tests, Andrew, is going to be this debate about when we stop testing 1.5 million people, healthy people, because that then is part of the whole issue of, well, you've got a never-ending pandemic like this.
Well, I think we need to, people need to test if they've got symptoms.
But of course that's different, isn't it? Because if you've got
That's the
symptoms,
difference, and that's
you're
what we've
not
got
a healthy person.
But that's right, and that's what we need to be getting to now, is just getting people to test who've got symptoms. And I also think within 2 to 3 weeks we need to move into a point where we're not going to be self-isolating for people who have got symptoms, because the NHS has coped, and the bigger threat to our whole way of life is forced absenteeism. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. If 10% of the NHS staff are not at work because they're in forced self-isolation with what effectively is a cold, that's going to cost people's lives. And that's got to be weighed in the balance as well. And don't get me on to making children wear masks in schools. I did have a thought this morning, Richard. I hope those teachers are wearing them all the time in the staff room.
Yes. Well, that's going to be very interesting. I'm quite sure we'll hear a lot more about that over the next couple of days. But again, we heard yesterday from the Education Secretary, Nadeem Sahawi. He promised that he was going to put to Parliament some more internal evidence. I think basically it's a sort of anecdotal survey of certain schools to you as MPs and to the country about the benefits of wearing a mask. And he says it's only for the minimum period possible. I worry this will be for weeks and weeks and weeks. And the only thing we know about this is that it causes harm to children. That's the main thing we know.
Well, I've always thought we were living in a society where we protect our children and young people from harm. And why I can't understand is why are we demanding that children take this precaution of wearing masks when people in office blocks are working next door to each other? They're not having to wear masks. And the only presumption I can come to is we're asking children to make a sacrifice to protect us, and that doesn't sit very well with me at all.
No, nor me, because of course all of the teachers have been offered the jabs. I suspect the vast, vast, vast majority of them have been jabbed, so therefore they've been protected from the worst of the disease.
Let's not beat around the bush, Richard. The job of the teaching unions is to represent the interests of the teaching profession. Who speaks for the children?
Well, that's right. Well, there are some great lobby groups like Us For Them who are speaking for the children, but maybe they need their own union. Andrew, thank you so much for those thoughts. That's Andrew Bridgen, MP for North West Leicestershire. It's pretty clear where he's going to be coming from in Parliament over the coming weeks. There's a massively important week to 2 weeks in Parliament. Stay with us. We're going to be talking to Clive Dix, the former chair of the vaccine task force, about how many jabs and whether we should be putting more vaccines into the developing world. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Emily Rose Adams. Expert warns that booster jabs every 6 months aren't sustainable in the long run as symptoms for COVID get less severe.
Today, I want to introduce my contract with the British people.
Sir Keir Starmer lays out new plans to try to bring Labour back to power. And Prince Andrew's lawyers make their stand today as Virginia Giuffre's deal with Jeffrey Epstein is made public. The head of the UK's vaccines regulator has warned it's not sustainable to deliver COVID booster jabs every 6 months as Omicron cases continue to rise. Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, who helped develop the Oxford vaccine, says the most at risk should be identified and prioritised instead. He also believes the worst of the pandemic is absolutely behind us. Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled his plans to bring the Labour Party back to power as he aims to build on the poll lead they've gained over the Conservatives. In a speech in Birmingham, the Labour leader said his focus will be on security, prosperity and respect, but acknowledged there is still more to be done to earn the trust of voters. He accused the Conservative Party of being unfit to govern.
It's the party that is the problem. This is not about the flaws of one individual. It's about the flaws of a whole style of government, the flaws of an ideology, of a political party that's been in power for too long.
And a judge in the US will hear arguments from Prince Andrew's lawyer later, who wants the civil case against him brought by Virginia Giuffre to be dismissed. Yesterday, the details of a £370,000 settlement Miss Giuffre made with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein were revealed. It didn't name the Duke, but suggested any potential connected defendant couldn't be sued. Prince Andrew denies allegations of sexual assault. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Reason re-engineered.
Richard Tice.
On Talk Radio.
Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV.
From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice. Fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 1:33. I'm standing in for Ian Collins. The weather looks as though it's lifting a little bit as many people are back at work for the first time this year. And we've just been talking to Andrew Bridgen MP about the challenges facing, the big decisions facing the government over the coming weeks. We need to get away from this second pingdemic, essentially, and the big questions about the length of the isolation period. Does it come down? And the other big question facing us all, the vast majority have been double jabbed, indeed treble jabbed with the booster. But we've seen, for example, Israel's already gone for a second booster, so a fourth jab. And there are question marks about how long the efficacy of the booster lasts. In a sense, this is also new. We're learning this. But how often do we keep jabbing ourselves? Or we say, actually, we're gaining natural immunity because the transmissibility of Omicron is such that so many people across the country very quickly actually have built up some natural antibodies. And I'm delighted now to be joined by Dr. Clive Dix, the former chair of the Vaccine Task Force, who I think has got some important thoughts about whether or not we should be essentially having a fourth jab or waiting and actually sending more doses to developing nations that haven't yet had the first jab. Clive, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us on Talk Radio. I think potentially is this your first outing on Talk Radio?
It very much is. Anyway, good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon. Well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And yes, just interested. You I think I've got some quite sort of clear thoughts. You know, with your experience of being so involved at the nerve centre of the acquisition of the vaccines and things, about the pace of where we go from here.
Yeah, yes, I do, and I think the answer to your question, should we give a fourth jab to everyone, is, in my judgment, the answer is no, and that's the first thing to say. And let me explain that. So, when we started off finding vaccines, we were looking for vaccines that would protect people from infection and hopefully transmission. While the Wuhan strain was around, the vaccines were quite effective at doing that. They weren't complete, but they did reduce quite significantly. As we moved through the variants, alpha variant, the beta, the gamma, and the delta, and now the Omicron, the ability of the vaccines to actually stop people getting infected and transmitting the virus became less and less. And it's pretty clear to me that reboosting won't change that. And transmission and infection is here to stay with a much milder variant. So we have to think again now. Now, the most important thing is that everyone should be vaccinated. That's clear. Everyone should be boosted, probably that's clear, just to make sure that everyone's got enough immunity. But I think what's happened is there's been a sort of government, not UK government only, many governments across the world have gone into groupthink about serological testing and antibodies, and think that high level of antibodies gives you vaccine efficacy, and it clearly does not. What gives you vaccine efficacy is knowing that behind that immune response to antibodies, there is also cellular immunity, and it's clear that the vaccines are still very effective at stopping people getting seriously ill and dying. And, you know, the number of patients, even going into hospital compared to before the vaccines, is far, far less. The number of people getting seriously ill is even less. The number of people dying are even less. So we're moving towards a situation with a milder variant that's unlikely to cause a huge amount of suffering and death, and already a population that has good cellular immunity. So I believe what we should be doing is getting to grips with measuring and understanding that cellular immunity to decide when, then, and who to vaccinate. And the likelihood is we should vaccinate the vulnerable and only the vulnerable.
And indeed, that's essentially what Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, he's just said as chairman of the JCVI.
Absolutely,
he should be targeting the vulnerable. And in a sense, that's familiar or similar language to the language used in the Great Barrington Declaration, which was, protect the vulnerable to the greatest degree. And in a sense, as we've got the milder version of the virus, and hopefully it continues only to get milder, that's where we're at. But the vulnerable essentially will always be vulnerable, won't they?
Yes, and we should always protect the vulnerable. And that's what we do for flu every year. We run a campaign to ensure anyone that's got underlying health conditions or is an older person gets vaccinated so they're protected. I'd go one step further now and say it's not long away that we should stop testing.
I was going to come on to that, because the testing of healthy people.
Testing anyway. I just think we should stop testing. We don't test for flu, and yet flu can take people into hospital and kill them. And in a bad year, it's doing that quite significantly. What we do, we say to people, if you're ill, go home, and when you feel better, come back to work. And I think that we need to get there. We need to get there within the next month.
Within the next month. So you're because that's, I mean, I haven't actually heard that sort of line of argument, that stop testing completely on the basis that people know when they feel feel ill, stay at home, and you've either got flu or you've got COVID. That's essentially what you're saying. But we know where we're at now.
We do, and I think if the next month pans out and we don't see a huge surge in deaths and serious disease, I think we probably know that we've got the immunity in the community, and therefore we should move to that position and move then to working out how we deal with an endemic virus next year and make sure we've got the best vaccines that give us the best boost next year, and be ready to do that. And that best boost is with strong cellular immunity, with durability.
And there was some comments you made, I think, either a week or 2 weeks ago, and there was an article I saw, Clive, where you actually said that you felt that it's quite likely that the Astra vaccine gives longer immunity, I think I've got that right, than some of the other vaccines, and that you felt that in a sense some of the misinformation given by other leaders in Europe had unfortunately damaged the sort of the confidence in that, and that may have actually cost lives.
Yes, I think the data that's emerging, and it's not definitive yet, is that countries that have used the AstraZeneca vaccine in the elderly see far less severe disease and death than those that didn't. And if you look now at the rise in hospitalizations and deaths in the European countries, there is a rise where there isn't in the UK. It's actually the number of people on ventilators is going down. And the only difference between the UK and Europe is the UK vaccinated the majority of their elderly with the AstraZeneca vaccine. Europe didn't. So I think there is the evidence is emerging. It needs fuller analysis. But we know that the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, produces a very good cellular immune response. That data is available. And the data's rather flimsy with the mRNA vaccine. Mm-hmm. So I think looking at all of the vaccines that we have in our portfolio now across the world, not just for the UK, and working out which ones produce that durable cellular immune response are the ones that we then should really gear up to using to vaccinate people.
And how much longer do we need to get that data to give us sufficient confidence in it, Clive?
Well, I think actually the government had quite a good foresight there. They set up a group called the COVID Immunology Consortium, headed by Professor Paul Moss, and they've been working away on the immunology of these vaccines and working out, and we're starting to see some of that data, and I think they'll be publishing it relatively soon, I would hope. And I think that's the sort of information that's critical as we move into 2022. And with that information, we should make really good choices of which vaccines to use in the coming winter.
Fascinating. Just whilst I've got you, the other side of this is the emerging new developments, exciting developments with some of the new treatments, the antiviral treatments that are being approved every few weeks. Paxlovid, I believe, was approved last week on New Year's Eve by the MHRA, following from the FDA and the European Medicines Agency, which in a sense is good news. I'd like to see more discussion about the confidence in the antivirals, because in a sense that's part of the confidence of coming out of this crisis, that people know that if they are unlucky enough to get hospitalized with it, then actually, or just before, that there are treatments that will deal with it, like a sort of an additional line of defense.
Yeah, I think that's really, I'm amazed that if you think back to only just 2 years ago, we had nothing, and now we've got antivirals. We learnt that dexamethasone saves lives. We've done some amazing things as well as the vaccines, and I think that's our full tool chest coming together, and eventually there'll be enough there to make sure that we just manage this and what will be an endemic disease in the UK for some time.
Because I'd like people to have sort of, in a way, everybody knows what jab they had, whether they had Astra, Pfizer or Moderna, whatever. I'd like people to be able to talk about the antivirals in that same way, that they know that if they get it, then, that whether they go for Molnupiravir or Paxlovid, that, they know it's there. And I think that's a real education process to build people's confidence.
I think the fact that we haven't yet got all of the doses available, there's only a limited number. I don't think it's time to push too hard, otherwise people will want them before they can have them. But I do agree that we really need to understand the antivirals, what role they'll play, where they'll be used, who will use. Of course, you can't just give them out to everyone and say if you get them, take them. They've got to be used in a targeted way, and at the moment probably kept again for the vulnerable people.
Yes, and what is the speed of rollout of the production of those antivirals? I mean, how quickly?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, normally to produce small molecule pills is much, much faster. Once you've got the process, it's a great big tank that you just make the chemical in and then turn it into a pill. I mean, an interesting statistic, we're now at the position where we may be able to make a few billion doses of vaccine a year. If you are making an enteric-coated capsule, which to take as a drug, the world's capacity to make that is in the trillions per month already.
Per month, wow.
There are factories there that just churn out. So the capacity won't be the issue. Once you've made the drug substance, to get these tablets out, tableting machines are rather fast-moving things. They produce huge numbers of tablets.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Clive, for those thoughts. That was Dr. Clive Dix, his first appearance here on Talk Radio, talking to me about some really interesting things. He actually thinks that we should stop testing full stop within a month or two, as essentially this moves towards being very similar to a common cold. We don't test for flu. So we get to a point where actually, if you view COVID, the Omicron version being a bit like flu, then you stop testing. And also he thinks that the AstraZeneca jab in the elderly is proving much more effective at preventing hospitalizations than the jabs mainly used in continental Europe, the Pfizers, the Modernas of this world. Fascinating thoughts from Clive Dix. Give us a call with your thoughts on that interview or anything else, or on Net Zero 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. Investigate what's under the think bonnet.
Talk loud, talk proud. Highly toxic debate. Battery acid opinions.
A voice above the crowd.
Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio, and that was a fascinating exclusive first interview with Dr. Clive Dix, the former chair of the Vaccine Task Force, with his thoughts. And absolutely key there, he said that we should stop testing not just the healthy people, but actually stop testing people with symptoms within a month or two. Because actually he's made a very simple point. We don't test for flu. And it may be, in his view, we're getting close to that point where actually we can start to treat COVID as something similar to flu. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Welcome your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We've got a couple of tweets before we got that from people and we've got one here from Sean who says Dr. Dix is absolutely right, 100% right on testing. Scrap it completely. If you're unwell, stay at home. Basic common sense. We are the station of common sense until you feel better. Last week, Sean had his booster, but he says a fourth COVID jab is taking the biscuit. I welcome your thoughts. Keep them coming in. We've got Graham in Berkshire. Good afternoon, Graham.
Good afternoon, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good. What are your thoughts in this new year? Are you excited? Are you hopeful?
I was.
Have I depressed you?
No. I'm a musician who works care homes. So January's become very dead, waiting for the government to make its decisions.
Yes, I can imagine.
But what I'm phoning about is one of the things I have to do is regular testing. But where are those tests made? Not in Great Britain. They're made in China.
Yes, I know. That's it. It's infuriating, isn't it? They gave us the virus, then they sold us the PPE, and then they sold us the tests.
But something you were saying earlier, did you know that 600,000 cars are on lease to an organisation called Motability?
I didn't. Help me. Where are you going with this one?
Right. 200,000 of those are replaced every year. And the government, who actually helps the people with disabilities, and it's right to do that, to buy these cars, lease these cars, does nothing to persuade them to buy cars that are manufactured in the UK. In fact, if you wanted to have an electric car, you've got to pay a £1,500 premium up front.
So where are these Motability cars made?
Well, you could buy some from Britain, because there's the Mini, of course, and there's some of the Nissan stuff. But most of them are coming in from abroad, France. MG comes from China. We've allowed our engineering to disappear. Now, we're the country that gave you Barnes Wallis, Newton, Mitchell, all these people, great designers, and we're nowhere. I mean, even Jethro Tull and his ideas on farming.
Well, there's no question that, in a sense, we've outsourced far too much of high quality manufacturing, and this has been a sort of a medium term, semi deliberate strategy. But for me, one of the drivers behind that, I mean, ultimately a lot of it's down to pricing and competition. But of course, one of the biggest costs in manufacturing businesses is energy, and our cost of energy has been disproportionately rising.
The problem, as I see it, is one, we've allowed strategic businesses to go out of the country's control, and that includes water. And
yes,
by nature, I'm a Tory. But two, every time that a council wants to buy British or a government wants to buy British, there's some rule that says they can't.
Well, that's the joy. I mean, that should no longer be the case. It may still be the case because leaders haven't changed, but actually there's no reason why that should still be the case. There's no longer a requirement to go through the EU procurement process. So that opportunity to change is there.
If we buy, my view, and I may be wrong, it's been known on all occasions, but if you buy British, you're getting income tax from the people who were on the shop floor building it. You're getting rates from the, corporation tax and business rates from the places where they're being built. And that money's then feeding back into the local economy. Now, I will probably be called a xenophobe for this.
No, it's actually about being a patriotic consumer, and it's one of the things I admire, Graham, about the French. They are wonderfully patriotic consumers of products which are built, made, grown in France. Whether it's whether you like French cars or not, they're great buyers of French cars. I love French cheese and French wine, and they're amongst the most patriotic consumers. And I think we should take a leaf out of their book in that sense.
Oh, I mean, I'm an English ale drinker. You can keep the lager. If you want good cheese and you want brie or camembert, then go to Cornwall.
And you're absolutely right. And that's the difference. There is some, and that's what we've got to have more promotion of and more confidence in about some of the great British cheeses, great British products. That's fantastic. Graham, I've got to take another call. Thank you so much. That was Graham in Berkshire, another patriotic consumer. We need much more of it. We've got some great tweets coming in here. Interesting one here from Organic Orange. Ridiculous we're not using domestic production for lateral flows. I agree with that. And another one here, Jackie says, excellent interview, Richard, with Dr. Dix. Bravo him, who was clear, concise and informative. So there are some thoughts there. We've got, I think, in Essex, Christine. Good afternoon, Christine.
Oh, hello.
Hi, what would you like to say? Good afternoon. How's it going in Essex?
First, I'd like to say it's nice to speak to you. Oh, we've just had some snow.
You've had some snow in Essex? We haven't had snow in London. Lucky you, Christine.
Yeah, we've just had some snow, but it's stopped now. What I wanted to talk about was water bills.
Ah, yes, that's another source of concern. Are your water bills rising as well, Christine?
Yeah. Well, my water bill that comes in is £30. The sewerage that goes out, they've charged me £82. Now,
what? Something's not right there.
Exactly. Anyway, I rang the company and they gave me all this stuff. They sent me a letter and telling me that it's something to do with the tidal and all this rubbish. I don't understand. Contacted my MP. And he said he would look into it. Oh, yeah, I've got a meeting with Anglian Water next week. Didn't hear anything back. Phoned them up again. Oh, it's still sitting on their desk. So that's that. But also, I'd just like to add that my electric company, my provider, and our refuse collection is owned by French companies.
Well, so this is one of the things, actually, Christine, and Graham just touched on it, but I've picked this up, and I'm going to be talking about it a lot more this year, that the huge percentage of all of our utilities, not just gas, not just electricity, but also water, and in a sense the network distribution companies and things, a huge percentage is owned by overseas investors, and they are literally profiteering from British consumers. And I think that we've got to address that. I want to try and highlight the extent of that, because they're making huge profits at our expense. The biggest single owner, I believe, from my research, of our utilities is a Chinese billionaire who's making 20% every year on his money invested.
Why can't we, I don't know, why can't we start bringing back, companies in Britain to provide our electricity?
Well, you're absolutely right, Christine. I think that actually we have got to completely relook at the ownership of our critical national infrastructure. It's not allowed in America, for example, for overseas states and overseas investors to own critical national infrastructure, nor is it in France, unless it's closely looked at and considered a friendly. I'm going to be talking later in the show, actually, about a new law that's coming into force today that may help in this regard. But in terms of our utilities, the British consumer is being ripped off to boost the profits of overseas investors, and that causes me a real concern. What about you, Christine?
Exactly. I just want to ask you one more thing before you go. Are you going to have any candidates in Southend?
Oh, no question, Christine. For the general election, we're hoping to have candidates across the whole country, 600 give or take, and we'll do the best we can in the local elections this May. Obviously, the general election is probably a year and a half, 2.5 years away. But no, we're ambitious, Christine. Have no doubt about that. Thank you for your call. That's Christine in Essex. She's had a little bit of snow this morning, but she is most concerned about the ownership of our utilities, the cost of our utility bills. This is all about the cost of living, and it's not good enough. Stay with us, because coming up, we're going to be talking about another major cost for hundreds of thousands of people, the cladding crisis. Following Grenfell, we'll be talking to one of the people involved. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 2, I'm Nadira Tudor. Expert warns that booster jabs every 6 months aren't sustainable in the long run as symptoms for COVID get less severe.
Today, I want to introduce my contract with the British people.
Sir Keir Starmer lays out new plans to try bring Labour back to power. And Prince Andrew's lawyers make their stand today as Virginia Giuffre's deal with Jeffrey Epstein is made public. The head of the UK's vaccine regulator has warned it's not sustainable to deliver COVID booster jabs every 6 months as Omicron cases continue to rise across the UK. Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, who helped develop the Oxford vaccine, says the most at risk should be identified and prioritised instead. He also believes the worst of the pandemic is absolutely behind us. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson will deliver a press conference on the spread of the Omicron variant at 5 p.m. this afternoon. It comes as several hospitals have declared critical incidents following warnings the NHS is in a state of crisis due to staff shortages. Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled his plans to bring the Labour Party back to power as he aims to build on the poll lead they've gained over the Conservatives. In a speech in Birmingham, the Labour leader said his focus will be on security, prosperity and respect, but acknowledged that there's still more to do to earn the trust of voters. He accused the Prime Minister of not being serious and the Conservative Party of being unfit to govern.
But the British people do not like being taken for granted, and they do not like being treated as fools. A government which refuses to follow the rules it sets for the rest of us loses the moral right to set those rules.
A judge in the US will hear arguments from Prince Andrew's lawyers later, who wants the civil case against him brought by Virginia Giuffre to be dismissed. Yesterday, the details of a £370,000 settlement Miss Giuffre made with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein were revealed. It didn't name the Duke, but suggested any potential connected defendant couldn't be sued. Prince Andrew denies allegations of sexual assault.
If he does escape judgment because the judge agrees with his lawyers, he's still got to face the court of public opinion, which at the moment isn't on his side.
And Novak Djokovic will compete in this month's Australian Open after receiving a medical exemption from a COVID vaccine. The world #1 tennis player has not spoken publicly about his vaccination status, and until now it was unsure if he would be able to compete. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out.
Richard Tice.
Powered by debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. I'm not sure about that introduction. I'm hoping you don't feel you're taking a chance by listening to me. But lots of you are certainly sending me lots of tweets, which is great. We've had one here from Dizzy who says, Dr. Clive Dix was the most illuminating, knowledgeable and decisive guest I've heard on Talk Radio, frankly, anywhere in the last year. He should be on Boris's top table going forwards. Well, I certainly hope that he is and that he does become a regular guest. Another one here from Amijo who says, I'm vulnerable. I had the AZ vax by choice as more conventional. 7 months later, I've still got antibodies confirmed by a blood test. And my husband had COVID over Christmas. And I didn't catch it, and we didn't isolate from each other. Listen to this. All we did was not kiss. So there we are, no kiss for Christmas for Amijo. But anyway, keep those tweets and calls coming in 0344 499 1000. And good news, a coffee has just been delivered to keep me alive and hopefully keeping the show going. So keep those messages and calls coming in. Now, we need to talk about the cladding scandal because, as you know, hundreds of thousands of leaseholders who bought their flats in good faith have, because of the cladding scandal, essentially been not able to sell their properties, or indeed it slowed up the rate of buying other properties, and are faced with huge bills as cladding is taken off, as they have these waking watchers, as their insurance bills soar. And it seems to me that in this scandal, the people who are paying the bills, who are suffering the most, are the only innocent party in this crisis, in this scandal, and that is the leaseholder. Because the developers have a responsibility, the suppliers of the cladding have a responsibility, the building regulations have a responsibility, and the government, who essentially is responsible for the building regulations, also have a responsibility. And so I'm delighted now to be joined by Paul Afshar, who is a campaigner for the End Our Cladding Scandal and an affected leaseholder. Paul, very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. So, as I understand, Paul, Michael Gove, the new Secretary of State for almost anything that you could dream of, including this, he was due to give an update, wasn't he, to Parliament, I believe, and to all of us before Christmas, about how he was going to change things because he recognised that the government proposals were simply not good enough. What's happened to that?
Well, Richard, first of all, thank you very much for continuing to cover this really important issue. It's important to me and the 1.3 million people across the UK affected. You're completely right. We were due to get an update before Christmas. It would have been a very welcome update from the new Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, but we didn't. And not only that, but a couple of days ago, we actually discovered through newspaper reports that the Grenfell-style cladding, so this is the most dangerous, the most flammable cladding on tens of thousands of buildings, will not be removed until 2025. So that's 5 years after the government's own deadline. They've missed their own deadline to protect the lives and homes of leaseholders like myself.
And essentially that completely blights the properties. It blights your ability to move, and it potentially burdens you with years and years of additional costs. So what's the reason for that delay, apart from government incompetence?
Well, look, I think the government themselves would say that this is a very tough issue, and and they're trying their hardest. But I actually don't think it's very tough at all. I think the solution is incredibly clear. What we need is to stick to the principle that no leaseholder should have to pay. I didn't ask for the cladding to be put on. I bought my flat in good faith, and yet I'm having to pay 100% of the costs. Actually, what we need is the people, the big construction companies with incredibly deep pockets to actually go into their coffers and cough up for their mistakes. The government themselves have talked about this figure of £5 billion, which is obviously a lot of money, and it sounds like a lot of money. And £2 billion of that will be made from a tax on these construction companies. But let me tell you, Richard, it is nowhere near enough to cover the cost of this cladding crisis. You're talking about 1.3 million people affected. This is only scratching the surface.
I know from the work I did on this in the first quarter of last year, I think it was March, that's a drop in the ocean compared to the real cost, which may be around 12 to 15 billion pounds. For me, actually, it was quite simple, and I came up with a very clear 3-point plan, which was that you have a long-term new warranty solution for all new homes, for example, which is currently done by an outfit called the NHBC, who've completely sort of washed their hands of this, quite disgracefully in my view. The second part of the solution is that, as you just said, the leaseholder should not pay because you're the only innocent party in this. And the third part is that the polluter must pay. I mean, the house builders, some of them have gone bust, but many of them are still in business. They've put up these buildings. They've got a responsibility, and they should come and sort it out.
I absolutely agree, and I think that would, if only the government would listen to you, Richard, we'd be in a hell of a better place. It's criminal that the companies that have caused this crisis and blighted the lives of so many of us are not really having to pay, and it's at a time over which the chief executives of these companies have taken home tens of millions of pounds in pay packets and bonuses. For what? For failure, to be honest. Meanwhile, we saw just 2 days ago, when the story about the government missing their own target broke, that a development in London, each individual flat owner would have to pay £85,000 each to have the cladding removed from their flat. That is unaffordable. We're going to see hundreds of thousands of bankruptcies. It's just not fair.
Essentially, current government policy deliberately forces tens of thousands of people to voluntarily declare bankruptcy in order to get themselves out of this scandal. And I just think it's reprehensible, actually, utterly reprehensible. And just help my listeners and viewers, please, Paul, on the difference between this magic 18-metre number.
Well, essentially, the 18-metre number, as the former Department of Housing themselves admitted, is quite an arbitrary number. But effectively, if your building is over 18 metres, you qualify for consideration of this £5 billion fund, or part of it. If your building is under 18 metres, this is about 6 or 7 floors, depending on how high the building is. Much like my own building, you don't qualify for any funding. So it's both an arbitrary distinction, but also it leaves hundreds of thousands of people without any recourse, without any funding whatsoever.
And you've got developments where you might have 4 or 5 blocks of apartments, one of which might be 7 or 8 stories and above the 18-metre, and the one next door is 4 or 5 stories, built in exactly the same way, with exactly the same materials and construction techniques, that therefore doesn't qualify. Where's the logic and justice in that? What are these people? How do they justify that?
It just seems deeply unfair, to be honest. And again, I think if you had Michael Gove on this show, what he would say is we're looking to tackle the buildings that are most at risk, so the highest and tallest buildings first. But as we've already discussed, that target's already been missed. I mean, we're seeing a lot of tough talk from the government, but no action. And fire doesn't discriminate. If you're in a building on the 8th floor and if you're in a building on the 4th floor and that building's on fire, well, the fire isn't going to pay attention or pay respect to the 18-metre rule. We need it fixing now.
Well, you've made a brilliant suggestion there, and I'm going to do exactly that, actually, Paul. I'm going to invite Michael Gove onto my show on Sunday. I'm going to ask my great production team to remind me to see what he says, because I think we've got to hold him and the government to account. It's just not good enough. And at the moment, presumably, you and many others are having to pay additional monthly bills for this waking watch.
The waking watch cost is really, in some respects, the worst part of this scandal. I'm in a fortunate position where I do not have to pay a waking watch, but I have two friends who do. And you're talking effectively about paying for usually two people, the cost of two people to patrol your block 24 hours a day to make sure that there is no fire. The problem with that is twofold. One, it is incredibly expensive. You're talking about a monthly cost of hundreds, if not thousands of pounds for young families and for first-time buyers. And two, it's incredibly ineffective. We've had instances just down the road from where I live in London where a building caught fire and the waking watch didn't catch it. The residents found out about it on Twitter. That's disgusting.
What's the point of them if they don't? The whole point of them is to spot a fire earlier. I mean,
precisely, it's just criminal, and to be quite frank, the money being made, the public money being made available to help people with the cost of the waking watch is risible. It's not nearly enough. So again, you have young families, first-time buyers who are forking out hundreds of pounds a month to pay for something that is drastically ineffective.
Interesting. Just whilst we've been speaking, Paul, Sophie, she has tweeted in that about the 1.3 million. Leaseholders stuck and with cladding not expected to remove. She says, and I think she's right, this is going to be one of the biggest problems that Boris Johnson and Michael Gove are going to face this year, because these costs are going to go up and up. These bills are landing on people's doors and people can't afford it. People can't pay it.
Precisely. And, just to reflect on the politics of this for a second, it just seems really short-sighted of the government not to try and fix this, because, as you say, so many people are going to get a bill that they can't afford. And their first point of action is to go to their parents. And their parents, many of whom will be retired, many of whom will not be able to afford it anyway, will be having to stump up cash. And, these are people who live all over the country in Labour constituencies and Tory constituencies. They're not going to vote for a government that's made them have to pay for their child's cladding. It just seems incredibly short-sighted and incredibly politically naive.
And just to help my listeners, so I've set out where I am on this with my solution. What's the Labour Party's solution?
Well, my understanding is that the Labour Party wants to encourage the construction companies to cough up. And in the meantime, the solution is for the government to actually provide much more funding, the funding that's needed, that 15 billion, to remove the cladding that needs to be taken off the most dangerous buildings. Actually, I think that's sensible, and it wouldn't be difficult for the government to do that. The government is a huge entity. It's a huge lender in many respects, and has the legal power to be able to reclaim that cost from the construction companies who themselves are to blame.
Are the Labour Party taking it sufficiently serious?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that Michael Gove is taking it sufficiently seriously as well. This is an issue which is going to affect any government over a number of years. But what we need to see is not just tough talk, it's real action as well from the government.
I think it is, Paul. And on the basis that Michael Gove didn't produce the update that he promised Parliament before Christmas, and of course he has got a massive in tray, a bit like Liz Truss. His job title is longer than my arm. I just question whether or not there's enough focus on that. Paul, we will keep in touch. We'll speak again, because I just think this is another huge issue. It's affecting hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, and it is totally unjust. That was Paul Afshar, the campaigner for the End Our Cladding scandal and an affected leaseholder. If you are an affected leaseholder in this scandal, give us a call, send us a message, let us know your circumstances. 0344 499 1000. It's a massive issue. It's completely unfair. There's a tweet just come in here, actually from Carl in Cumbria. Surely the freeholder is responsible for fabric, communal areas, external walls and roofs of a building. That is true, Carl, but the reality is, in many cases, the freeholder is almost like a shell company with no money. It just receives the ground rent, so it just doesn't deal with the situation. But one thing we do know is the leaseholder is the innocent party. Stay with us. We're going to be talking, we're going to be taking some more of your calls, your tweets, and we need to talk about parking fines. More issues that are completely unacceptable. Private profiteering It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Talk Radio.
Smooth, strong, and very long.
Tell your ears to chew on this. We think what you say.
Thoughtfully you're thinking.
The home of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 2:20. We're well into the second hour, and of course at 4 o'clock you've got Drive Time. Jeremy Kyle back in action in the hot seat, and then at 7 o'clock, of course, we've got Kevin O'Sullivan taking over the hot seat as well. Some tweets coming in here regarding the cladding scandal and the interview just had. Margot says we've lost 2 sales on a property because there's no EWS 1 certificate that's been issued for the property that was surveyed 6 months ago. As I understand it, in order to sell a property with cladding, you've got to have this EWS 1 certificate, and that is a real issue. They're very expensive. They're taking too long to get. And we've got another one here from Neil in the People's Democratic Republic of Swansea, who says 37 billion on a worthless track and trace system, but still no removal of cladding. Another message here saying the manufacturers should cough up for the cladding. It didn't do what it's promised. Well, essentially, that's part of what I call the polluter pays. So in the first instance, the home builder, the house builders should pay. They then recover the due sum from the manufacturers of materials that weren't up to scratch. And there's a good point here from someone who's saying, why should we expect the taxpayer to pay for the cladding when you buy a property? You have the surveyors in, as I understand, renting tenants. Let's just see what that says. Doesn't pay, but those that bought the home, it's their own responsibility. The point here, and there's no name for that message, the point here is that they did have a surveyor in, and the surveyor passed it because it complied with the building regulations. And the point is, the building regulations were set by the government. And therefore, again, it's not the leaseholder's fault that the building regulations turned out to be unsatisfactory, incorrect. As I understand it, only the UK and Dubai allowed this type of cladding that was used for the Grenfell Tower to be used above 18 metres high. So actually, it's the building regulations that were massively at fault. So that's the thought there. And in a sense, it's just another example of the consumer, British people, in this case leaseholders, ending up being ripped off. But I need to talk about another massive rip-off that is going on, because it came out in the Times actually this morning. The number of parking tickets being issued by private parking companies, and you couldn't contemplate this number, but it seems between April and September last year, every single day, 22,000 tickets were issued by private parking companies, either on behalf of the local council or on behalf of a local property owner. That's some 4 million tickets. And very often the cost of these tickets can be up to £100. Give us a call or send us a message if you've been the victim of one of these tickets. It just seems, again, so often totally unjust, these huge sums. And again, it just feels to me a bit like rip-off Britain, whether it's some of the utility bills that we're having to pay in order to create huge profits for overseas owners, or indeed these parking fines. It just seems massively unfair. There's some 163 parking firms who they can basically approach the DVLA to get the data for a car registration, and the biggest company is called Parking Eye, and they've got some nearly 900,000 fines, it seems, if this is correct. So, this is it's another whole industry, and it just feels to me that we are being ripped off. Let us know your experiences in your area on that. And it feels like it's another sort of part of the whole LTN crisis. Councils just imposed LTNs on people, which again causes huge problems, huge fines if you go through them and you didn't know it. Let us know. 0344 499 1000. Albert in York, good afternoon. What would you like to say?
Hi, Richard.
Hi there.
Yeah, you were speaking earlier about the prosperity of the UK and what we can do in the future. But the most hamstringing element to that is, of course, the public sector itself, which is basically a socialist utopia.
And in terms of, you think that the public sector is too big, or they're just not prompt enough, fast enough, efficient enough, and they waste too much of our money?
Yes, all of those things.
And
so basically, they exist with they benefit from actually being inefficient, because the more inefficient they are, the more money they get in these sectors.
Yes, I mean, I get the point. I think what really drives people mad is the waste. And we see it in so many different areas. It's our money at the end of the day, and it's just so often spent so very badly. One of the issues that drives me mad, Albert, is in the NHS. Wonderful, highly trained nurses on the front line have an average salary of around £31,000, £32,000, I recall, whereas you can be a untrained, unskilled diversity and inclusion manager. If you're a director, you might be earning over £100,000. An assistant diversity and inclusion manager might be earning 70 to 80 grand. It just seems utterly the wrong way around, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. And also, if you look at the suppliers who supply the NHS, they get 2 to 3 times the amount they do in the private sector. I mean, sometimes they get 100% markup on the goods that they're actually selling them.
That's right, indeed. Have you got any particular gripe about something you've seen in the public sector that winds you up, or is it just across the board?
Well, if you see it in one sector, it's bound to be going on across the board, really. And, they benefit from being inefficient. I mean, we pay enormous amounts of tax to them. They also borrow enormous amounts of money and basically spend it on themselves, because that's what they do.
That's right.
we're stuck in a cycle.
Well, we need to make it a lot more efficient and a lot more responsive, because at the end of the day, Albert, it's our cash, it's our money that funds the public sector. Thank you very much. That was Albert in York. Joanna in Pembrokeshire, good afternoon. Are you the same Joanna who's just sent me a tweet about leaseholds in Scotland?
About what, sorry?
Have you just sent a tweet about leaseholds in Scotland?
No, that's not me. I was ringing in about parking tickets.
Oh, great. Tell us about parking tickets, Joanna.
Okay, so I've literally today had a letter through of discontinuance, which means that the parking company that were taking me to court, it was actually my husband's ticket, but for whatever reason I took it on. And we've had the discontinuance through today, which is great news, because this has been ongoing since January of last year.
Wow.
With a ticket dated back from 2018.
Ah, so you've won the battle. Help my listeners and viewers. How do they win the battle?
Sorry?
How do my listeners and viewers learn from that and win the battle too?
Well, it's a really tricky thing. What I did initially, I went on Facebook and joined a Facebook group, which was actually the worst thing that I did, because it was run by a guy called Tony Taylor, who gets a lot of good press, but also he put me in touch with a guy, Peter Fisher, that was going to fight it for me, paid him to do that. That was another just very fraudulent. Anyway, luckily I was picked up by a young man called Matthew Ramsden, and he sent me in the right direction, and he wrote my defence for me, and I've added to it and sort of like jigged things about a bit. And after a really long battle, it went to the magistrate's court, the county court, and then, like I say, I got the letter through today to say that they've discontinued. I don't know why. I'm not quite sure, because they say you've got to do everything by the book and you've got to be very matter of fact. But I actually put a letter in from my heart, and I'm not sure if that swayed it a little bit.
Very often, a passionate letter from the heart, just setting out how it happened, what are your concerns. That's fascinating, Joanna. Thank you very much. Yeah. I appreciate that. That's Joanna in Pembrokeshire. That if you look, there are clearly ideas and ways to get these private parking tickets overturned. So look online, see how you do that. There may be people that can help. There may be people that try and scam off you. So be aware. I wasn't aware of that, but I think it's a massive rip-off. Coming up, we're going to be talking about decriminalising drugs in London, the trial that Sadiq Khan is proposing us. Stay with us. Keep the calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. You're listening to Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. Expert warns that booster jabs every 6 months aren't sustainable in the long run as symptoms for COVID get less severe.
Today, I want to introduce my contract with the British people.
Sir Keir Starmer lays out new plans to try to bring Labour back to power. And Prince Andrew's lawyers make their stand today as Virginia Giuffre's deal with Jeffrey Epstein is made public. The head of the UK's vaccine regulator has warned it's not sustainable to deliver COVID booster jabs every 6 months as Omicron cases continue to rise across the UK. Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, who helped develop the Oxford vaccine, says the most at risk should be identified and prioritised instead. He also believes the worst of the pandemic is absolutely behind us. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson will deliver a press conference on the spread of the Omicron variant at 5 p.m. this afternoon. It comes as several hospitals have declared a critical incidents following warnings the NHS is in a state of crisis due to staff shortages. Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled his plans to bring the Labour Party back to power as he aims to build on the poll lead they've gained over the Conservatives. In a speech in Birmingham, the Labour leader said his focus will be on security, prosperity and respect, and accused the Prime Minister of not being serious and the Conservative Party of being unfit to govern. A judge in the US will hear arguments from Prince Andrew's lawyers later, who want the civil case against him brought by Virginia Giuffre to be dismissed. Yesterday, the details of a £370,000 settlement Ms Giuffre made with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein were revealed. It didn't name the Duke, but suggested any potential connected defendant couldn't be sued. Prince Andrew denies allegations of sexual assault. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half.
Reason re-engineered. Richard Tice on Talk Radio. Listen on DAB+.
On your smart TV. From global current affairs to the issues that hit closer to home.
Richard Tice. Fighting your corner on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk on Talk Radio. We've been talking just then about parking fines. A number of people have got some ideas about how you can overturn them. We had Joanna in Pembrokeshire there. So look online. Don't hold back. Don't just pay it blind. There's definitely things that you can do. Message in here from Jenny saying, I've had a search on MSE. Some of the threads are interesting. We now need to look at something else that's been in the news today, which is the Mayor of London, who I don't often agree with, Sadiq Khan. He's proposing to essentially, with some trials in 3 boroughs across London, in Lewisham, Bexley and Greenwich, to actually decriminalise cannabis, and therefore that if you're caught with cannabis in those areas for the trial period, that you wouldn't be prosecuted, you'd be taken back to your family home and put on some form of counselling course. Clearly this is a very significant proposal. It's very different to government policy. It's also very different to the policy of the Labour leadership, Sir Keir Starmer, although interestingly actually David Lammy, the Shadow Justice Secretary, he is actually previously endorsed similar schemes. And I think it is a massively important issue that we've got to talk about, because of course we had the news tragically over the weekend that last year was the highest year for murders of teenagers in London, and many of the 30 who've died may have been related to some form of drug-related issue, although it's not exactly quantified, but we generally know that is the case. So I'm delighted now to be joined by Ian Hamilton, Senior Lecturer in Addiction and Mental Health at York University. Ian, a very good afternoon. Thanks for joining Tice Talk here to talk about this issue, because this is it's a big new step, and I believe there's not enough open discussion about whether you decriminalise, i.e. you don't prosecute, or whether you legalise. And in a sense, sometimes if you know that you keep doing something and it doesn't work, and we've been losing the drugs war for 40 years, sometimes maybe we've got to accept we've got to try something different.
Well, that sounds really logical, Richard. But as you say, we seem to have been banging our head against the drug policy wall for 40 years, don't we? Going round and round the same issues. And, you know, if it wasn't so serious, it would be laughable, wouldn't it? But, you know, we're facing record numbers of people dying from drugs. It has to be said, very few from, if any, from cannabis. But it's not just cannabis in terms of drugs policy that needs reviewing. It's the whole of drugs policy. But I really welcome this move from Sadiq Khan. I mean, it was a bit of deja vu. I'm old enough to remember, I don't know if you are, Brian Paddock in Lambeth back in 2001, trying something very similar. He was the police commander at Brixton at the time, and instructed his officers not to be prosecuting people for possession of small amounts of drugs. And that, although it was only in Lambeth, was thought to be very influential in changing actually government policy around cannabis and reclassifying the drug from a Class B to a Class C drug. We're now back up to it being a Class B drug again. So it will be interesting to see if Sadiq Khan's very kind of experimental and innovative move will have the same effect at Westminster.
Because he actually, in his manifesto to be re-elected as mayor in May last year, part of that was that he was going to set up a commission to look at a review of drug policy. I think both either decriminalisation or legalisation, as I understand. I actually haven't heard much more about whether that commission has been established, whether it started work. Maybe you know.
I don't think it's been fully established. I think there's been some work going on in the background, but my understanding from the press release today from the Mayor's office is that it's still to be established. But again, my understanding, it's on very limited information so far, is that will be the group that will evaluate how successful or not this trial is. And that's really important. You know, it's great to have a trial going on, but all too often these pilots, these trials aren't evaluated. So we don't know actually what the impact is. I mean, my suspicion is this is very much similar, isn't it, to, you know, if you're caught speeding, which I'm afraid and ashamed I have been, and then gone on a speeding awareness course.
Likewise,
Am
join
I in
the
good
club.
company, Richard?
You're in very good company.
Right. But, you know, for all the jollity around that, it was actually quite an interesting experience, and it did have an effect on the way that I drove after that. However, I think that's very different to, you know, diverting particularly young people onto an awareness course around the harms of cannabis. And I think at best what we can hope for is those perhaps using a lot of cannabis it might have some impact on, not the course itself, but the people it puts them in touch with, who will be drawn from the specialist drug treatment sector. But I suspect this will have very little impact on those using cannabis recreationally, which is the vast majority of people in London and beyond.
And do we know how long this trial is in these 3 boroughs?
That's not clear yet. I mean, this is, you know, has all come from a leak from a national newspaper. So I think we've got what's been announced by the Mayor's office in response to that leak, which is very limited. But I gather it's imminent. It's still got to go to County Hall to be approved. So I think we're looking at probably another few weeks before it even begins at best. But you'd have to allow a decent amount of time for any rigorous evaluation to take place.
So would that be 6 months, 12 months?
I would recommend, if I was asked, 12 months at a minimum. And look at what you put in place to evaluate that.
And if we can just talk about the impact of cannabis, because those who are anti any form of decriminalisation or legalisation will say that cannabis leads to psychosis, that the levels of THC have increased dramatically in recent years, and that it's a gateway drug. With your experience in mental health and addiction, what are your answers to those concerns that people raise?
Well, I mean, if I could give you a silver bullet answer, I would. But as you would expect, it's a little bit more complicated. But I think we can murder some myths straight away. Cannabis use doesn't lead to heroin use. Otherwise, we'd be inundated with people using heroin. You know, there are millions of people using cannabis. Very few of them will go on to use heroin. So that's one myth we can put to bed straight away. In terms of cannabis and psychosis, it does seem as though there are some people who are sensitive to the effects of cannabis, but we don't have the same level of proof that we do with smoking and lung cancer. So we can't definitively say that cannabis causes psychosis. All we can say is cannabis is associated with psychosis. I mean, on that one point, the plea I would make, I think the biggest public health gain we could make with cannabis is to decouple it from tobacco. There are still far too many people, young people, who are introduced to tobacco via spliff, a reefer of cannabis, than they are through cigarettes. And they don't realise that it's the cigarettes, the tobacco, that they're using in rolling with cannabis that they're becoming dependent on. And that to me is a bigger concern. The harms associated with tobacco are well known. So I think from a public health point of view, if we could decouple those two drugs, that would have a huge impact on young people.
Interesting. That's very interesting indeed. I mean, it's often forgotten, a couple of points here, that cannabis has actually only been illegal in the UK, I think, since the mid-1920s. Before that, it was legal. And there's a huge sort of hypocrisy here, it seems to me, Ian, in that the United Kingdom, as I understand, is the biggest grower and exporter of cannabis legally for export for medicinal purposes.
You couldn't make it up, could you? You know, it's we have, you know, progressive policy in America, South America, across Europe, and we seem to have been left behind.
So we've got a situation where government policy is that it's okay to grow cannabis, to sell it overseas for medicinal purposes, but it's almost impossible to use it for medicinal purposes here in the United Kingdom. Where's the logic in that? Leaving aside the decriminalisation of it for general recreational use.
I can't find any logic in it, Richard. You're absolutely right. There is none. There's none to be found, is there? And, you know, in fairness, when the Home Secretary a few years ago opened up access to medicinal cannabis, that was seen as a real turning point in this country. You know, after the case of Billy Caldwell, who some listeners will remember, young lad with epilepsy who needed cannabis, or an extract of cannabis rather, to improve his health and to stop him fitting so often.
But it's I do recall that case, and yes, I think it was actually Sajid Javid who, as Home Secretary, essentially changed the laws to allow that. but I'm told it's still really, really almost impossible to get a prescription.
From a practical point of view, there's been no change. I think something like less than half a dozen prescriptions on the NHS have been issued in the 3 or 4 years since that change was made. So, and even in the private sector, it's a little bit easier to get hold of a prescription, but by no means easy, and obviously prohibitive in terms of cost for most families.
Whilst we've been talking, Ian, a couple of interesting tweets that have just come in. One from Bob in Camberley, who says, how can the mayor create local drug laws? And another one from David, who says, can you please explain how the mayor is now able to change the laws of the land, not the people who are elected to do that? Do you know what the answer to that is?
I do, yeah. I mean, it's not within his jurisdiction to change the law. And let's be clear, even when this pilot and trial starts, cannabis will still be illegal to possess, to supply, to use in Lewisham, Bexley and Greenwich. The difference is what he is able to do is, as mayor, he's able to liaise with the Met Police and look at how they operationalise the law. So, let's be honest, it's not just 3 boroughs in London that operate this policy. There are various areas around the country with different police and crime commissioners that are offering a pretty similar approach.
That's right. Essentially, they're doing it sort of undercover, to use a better expression, implicitly, as opposed to here, where Sadiq Khan is proposing to do it explicitly, which, as you say, because of course he is actually the police and crime commissioner for the Met Police, isn't he?
That's right. So he's able to direct them to some degree, although I think he's pushing on a fairly open door, if I'm honest. I think most police officers I come into contact think the laws are nonsense as well. It's certainly around cannabis. I'm not saying all drugs, but it is seen as a time-consuming event. And unfortunately, like stop and search has proven, the way the law is applied is not equal. And we know that people in Lewisham, young black men in Lewisham, are 2.5 times more likely to be stopped and searched for possession of cannabis and other drugs than their white counterparts. So, and the problem with this is actually the criminal charge does far more harm than the drug itself, because it obviously, not just restricts travel, because certain countries won't allow you in if you've got a drugs charge, but it really restricts employment opportunities, which, of course, for communities facing inequality, it just amplifies the problem.
Ian, thank you so much for your thoughts. That was Ian Hamilton, Senior Lecturer in Addiction and Mental Health at York University, on Sadiq Khan's plans to have trials of decriminalising cannabis in Lewisham, Bexley and Greenwich. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, your views on that, or tweet us at Talk Radio. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. New. Best recipe ever. Talk Radio.
Captivating, campaigning, controversial. Powered by common sense.
May cause mild irritation. The word on the street.
Standing up for the little guy.
Rewire your thinking.
Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. And at 4 o'clock, of course, we've got Jeremy Kyle back for drive time. At 7, we've got Kevin O'Sullivan. And this is my last day standing in for Ian Collins. He'll be back tomorrow. So we've got messages coming in and some calls we'll take in a second about the decriminalisation of cannabis, the trial in southeast London. And I think I just emphasise that point, that it is a trial. And my position on this is that we've carried on fighting the same drug wars and continuing to lose for 30 to 40 years. And it's the definition of madness to keep trying the same thing over and over and again and expect a different answer. And I actually think that the people need to be allowed to discuss this more, and that politicians need to listen to the people. And actually, what's wrong with having a trial with a defined period and then learning the lessons from it, the good, the bad and the ugly? And it may be the lesson is it was the wrong thing to do. But at least you've tried it, rather than just blithely assumed that what you've been trying for the last 40 years and hasn't worked and the situation is getting worse. And here's what really winds me up the most. It's young, predominantly black young men who are dying on our streets, who are bleeding out as they essentially serve to deliver drugs to very often white, wealthy, middle class, whether it's in Chelsea or Notting Hill. And I just think that's morally indefensible. And they're often very involved in delivering drugs for the county lines. And this situation is getting worse. More young people are dying. And therefore, we've got surely to be prepared to have a grown-up discussion about this and to try something different. And I emphasise the word try, and to learn the lessons from it. You have a definitive period from it, and then you say, right, what worked, what didn't, how do we adjust it, how do we change it, how do we learn from it? That's my view, but I think as a nation, as cities, that we've got to discuss this more, because we've got to do something better. But we've got Billy in London on this issue. Is it Billy? Yes, Billy, hi.
Hi, Richard. How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good. What are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, I just, like you said earlier, I agree. I don't think that the war on drugs for the last 40 years has really worked in any way, shape or form. I'm not a huge fan of Sadiq Khan at all, but...
Likewise.
But I think this is one of the few ideas which might be worth trying. I don't think it's not setting something in stone. It's not saying, like, right, let's legalise drugs. I think that it's giving something new a try, because the last 40 years really haven't worked. And I think maybe, decriminalising or potentially legalising it might be a good idea, taking drugs out of the hands of criminals, regulating them, taxing them, and sort of stop wasting police time in some ways. Could be an idea.
This is the point, isn't it, Billy, is that you've got to try something. The answer is, none of us know the answer, how it would go and the consequences. But if you have a small, limited trial in an area for a definitive period of time, you then learn the lessons. And I think that's, for me, I think that's interesting. And I'm not a fan of Sadiq Khan at all. But it just feels to me, whether you try it in London or whether you try it explicitly in another city, I just think we've got to be brave enough, however difficult it is for many, many people. And I get the concerns about it. I really do. But sometimes in life, you've just got to try something different in a limited way.
Yeah, I entirely agree. I think it's really important that we pay very close attention to the results, but giving it a try is the most important thing. And I think you never know; some good come out of it. Some good could come out of it, because we realise that it could actually, I don't know, have some good effects. Takes reduces gang violence.
If we can find
like
exactly, but if we can find ways to reduce gang violence, to reduce the knife crime. The hideous knife crime, the murder of young men, very often teenagers. We've seen the results last year. Much of that will have been drug related. And if we can reduce the wasting of police time so that actually they can focus on other issues that are really important to everyone's daily lives, patrolling streets, preventing burglaries, robberies, crime, and catching criminals, then I think it's worth a try. That's my view. Billy, thank you so much for your call. Let's go down to Hampshire. Nick, good afternoon. What are your thoughts on this or something else?
Oh, good afternoon, Richard. Thanks for taking my call. I rang originally to talk about these parking companies.
Oh, yeah, well, go for that as well. That's wound people up.
I've been fascinated by the conversations about legalising cannabis that Sadiq has.
Yeah, to be clear, Nick, it's actually decriminalising. So, decriminalising. There's an important difference. That's fine.
Okay, but just quickly, 20 years ago, Ben Elton wrote a fantastic fiction novel called High Society, and I'd recommend any of your interested listeners to Google it, get it off Amazon or wherever, because he summarises all the massive benefits to society for doing just that. So anyway, that's an aside. These parking companies, just one thing I would say, it's wrong to talk about the tickets they issue as parking fines. They're not fines. They're private invoices. And that national hero of ours, the consumer champion, Martin Lewis, with his money-saving expert website, provides templates that you can use to base your letter and update it with locations or whatever and the parking numbers, and submit these letters, these formats, to the parking companies that issue these parking tickets. And invariably, they just walk away because they're so well structured. So I've used them and succeeded in not having to pay anything.
Aha.
So I really would encourage your listeners that suffer these outrageous charges to take a look at that website, Money Saving Expert, and look at the templates. They've actually got them specifically for Parking Eye because they're so profligate in issuing these things, and they charge ridiculous sums of money. And his challenge is basically saying these are bills issued by the landowner for costs. Well, how can they justify that you've incurred 150 odd pounds worth of charges for having your vehicle on their property for 30 minutes? It's just ridiculous.
That's a very interesting point.
He shows you a legal defence.
So Money Saving Expert has got a whole section, is what you're saying, Nick. I didn't realise that.
It's been going on for years. And
I've been behind the curve because I've had a few of these fines. They drive me mad.
Well, yeah, if you get the chance in your busy life, Google it. But have a look at Parking Eye on the Martin Lewis Money Saving Expert website. His team have put together some excellent templates, very easy to copy and paste into an email, ping it off to the company, and they get one and think,
there we are. There we are. We've my listeners and viewers, we've got top tips on how to save money on these parking fines. Tens of thousands of them being issued every single day. Nick, just whilst I've got you, my sort of opening question about obviously the cost of living, and we're going to be talking in the third hour about energy prices and things, what to do about that. Given the change in all our lives, if net zero is carried out as per the government plans, what's your view on a national debate followed by a national referendum on net zero?
Well, I don't know if I can make any useful contribution there because I'm actually a fan of fracking.
Join the club. Join the club, Nick.
We got a massive benefit sitting under the ground waiting to be exploited that will free us from the Russians and everybody else and bring the cost down. But
no, you've absolutely got something to contribute because it's only 4 years ago that the Conservative government in 2017, led by Theresa May, it was part of their manifesto to have a new shale gas industry which would create thousands of jobs and generate lots of wealth in the north of England, and then they bottled it.
Well, that was because a lot of protesters were quoting that exceptional instance in America somewhere where there was an explosion. But it was years ago, and safety measures have been toughened up. It's a nonsense to use that argument that it's not safe.
Fantastic.
Tree huggers.
Nick, thank you so much. That's Nick in Hampshire with his thoughts on parking fines. Some great tips there. Money Saving Expert is the place to go. I've learned something on this show, which is great. Some tweets coming in from various people about decriminalising people. One here from Tier 87 saying, try telling that to those that live close to the dealers that it's a good idea not to prosecute. Well, I guess my point there is if they consistently do that at the moment and the police don't move them on at the moment, and that's what I constantly heard on the doors, maybe we've got to try something different. Philip says in the opposing vote, he says, legalise cannabis and tax it. There we are. That's his view. Whereas Mick says, I think you'll find that cannabis isn't the problem with county line gangs. It's cocaine and heroin, and I don't think decriminalisation would stop the stabbings. Interesting there. Few different range of thoughts. That's why we've got to be brave enough to talk about it, and I think try something different for a period of time and learn the lessons. We're going to be talking after the news to John Redwood, MP, about the energy crisis, what we can do about it. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
At 3, I'm Nadira Tudor. Expert warns that booster jabs every 6 months aren't sustainable in the long run as symptoms for COVID get less severe.
Today, I want to introduce my contract with the British people.
Sir Keir Starmer lays out new plans to try to bring Labour back to power. And Prince Andrew's lawyers make their stand today as Virginia Giuffre's deal with Jeffrey Epstein is made public. The head of the UK's vaccine regulator has warned it's not sustainable to deliver COVID booster jabs every 6 months as Omicron cases continue to rise across the UK. Professor Sir Andrew Pollard, who helped develop the Oxford vaccine, says the most at risk should be identified and prioritised instead. He also believes the worst of the pandemic is absolutely behind us. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson will deliver a press conference on the spread of the Omicron variant at 5 p.m. this afternoon. It comes as several hospitals have declared critical incidents following warnings the NHS is in a state of crisis due to staff shortages. Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled his plans to bring the Labour Party back to power as he aims to build on the poll lead they've gained over the Conservatives. In a speech in Birmingham, the Labour leader said his focus will be on security, prosperity and respect, but acknowledged that there's still more to do to earn the trust of voters. He accused the Prime Minister of not being serious and the Conservative Party of being unfit to govern.
But the British people do not like being taken for granted. And they do not like being treated as fools. A government which refuses to follow the rules it sets for the rest of us loses the moral right to set those rules.
A judge in the US will hear arguments from Prince Andrew's lawyers later, who want the civil case against him brought by Virginia Giuffre to be dismissed. Yesterday, the details of a £370,000 settlement Miss Giuffre made with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein were revealed. It didn't name the Duke, but suggested any potential connected defendant couldn't be sued. Prince Andrew denies allegations of sexual assault.
If he does escape judgment because the judge agrees with his lawyers, he's still got to face the court of public opinion, which at the moment isn't on his side.
And Novak Djokovic will compete in this month's Australian Open after receiving a medical exemption from a COVID vaccine. The world #1 tennis player has not spoken publicly about his vaccination status, and until now, it was unsure if he would be able to compete. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Standing up, speaking out. Richard Tice. Powered by Debate.
Take a chance with the Tice Man. Richard Tice.
A man of impeccable pedigree. Richard Tice. Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're into the final hour and we've got a lot to get through in this hour before Jeremy Kyle starts at 4 o'clock with his drive show. One tweet that's just come in. Can I ask, how would you address the issue with what appears to be a left-leaning civil service who seems to be running rings around the government, preventing progress on things like immigration? Well, of course, there's many other things. That was Tracy from Weston-super-Mare. Well, one gentleman who I think often has concerns about the quality of how the various government departments are being run and their impact is my next guest. I'm delighted to be joined by Sir John Redwood, Conservative MP for Wokingham, to look at what is the big issue of the day, the week, the month, and I suspect the year, which is the cost of living crisis, much of which is driven by two things. Firstly, the increase in energy prices and taxation. Sir John, a very good afternoon to you. And I know you've been speaking out bravely over the last couple of weeks about this issue. This is, I feel this is a much bigger issue now than COVID. And there's a headline in the Daily Mail today, Sir John, about eating versus heating, which encapsulate it in just 3 words.
Well, indeed, Richard, and I've been speaking out on the need to produce more domestic energy and have more local energy available on contract at sensible prices rather than depending on imports at very high spiked prices when the world is short. And I've been speaking out against higher taxes. And I think, as you rightly say, coming together this April, unless there is some change, will be a big surge in everybody's energy bill when the price caps are reviewed and lifted, at the same time as a national insurance hit on all working people. And this is wrong, Richard. This is against the Conservative manifesto, and it's a bad income squeeze. I don't want people having to make difficult decisions to that extent in their family budgets. We should be helping them, not hindering them. So I voted against the national insurance hike. I'm urging the government every day that I have power of voice to do so, to say, take the national insurance increase out of the system. We don't need that in April. And on energy, I'm redoubling my efforts to say, look, there's plenty of oil and gas out there in the North Sea. Give them the licenses, allow them to produce it, encourage them to produce it, instead of banning our oil and gas and then having to import on disadvantageous terms.
So let's just sort of segment that a little bit. The first thing is, of course, you touched on the energy cap that's rumoured to be going to be lifting in April, what could be £600 or £700. But of course, for an individual, that's a net of tax figure. You've got to earn £1,000, give or take, in order to be able to fund the £700. So, it's a massive, massive impact relative to the average salary of around £30,000. And in a sense, you've got to look at short-term measures and then the medium-term measures, because you obviously can't start pumping gas from oil fields in the next couple of months. But there are measures the government could do short-term, are there?
Well, there are measures. I mean, you can take the taxes off as an immediate measure, and you could add to my list of taxes to cancel or reduce. You could take the VAT off fuel, which would make a small difference to the bills, which would be a step in the right direction. But don't underestimate the power to flex their own production. I mean, just turning the taps on a bit more and giving people incentives to produce more that's already there would help. And then there are some investment projects to make a sizable step up in the amount of gas and oil we could produce. It would take a bit longer, but the markets would be quite pleased to know they were underway, and you could start negotiating future contracts against those, which would help the market position.
But unfortunately, your colleagues, John, have been doing exactly the opposite. They've actually been refusing last year licences for the oil field and the gas fields at Cambo and Jackdaw. So the direction of travel is in completely the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's been wrong. I mean, I've mentioned those two projects as good examples of things that could take place quite quickly. And the mere fact that you gave them the go-ahead would start to influence market behaviour and would show people that for a few months or a couple of years' time, there would be new options, which would be very important in this rather tense situation. So, and let's hope we have a bit of luck. I mean, it does seem that gas prices are now tumbling because we're at the moment having a mild winter and there's a bit of wind again. So we're getting some wind power, but we learned the hard way, for those who didn't understand it in the first place, that if you rely too much on wind energy and you have a period when the wind doesn't blow, you have a really bad crunch and you're then a desperate last minute buyer of other forms of energy as standbys, and it's not a good position to get into.
Well, that's right. But of course, we know that it suits President Putin to keep gas prices high, and he's playing all sorts of geopolitical games in order to try and achieve that. And as you say, the wind doesn't blow. And in a sense, sod's law is that at some point in January or February, we will have a proper cold snap that has all sorts of implications and makes life really tough for people who can't afford the heating.
Yeah, the nightmare now would, for the national system, would be a longish period of very cold weather with no wind. And then we really are in trouble. Now, let's hope we're going to get through this winter in current shape, where at the moment we've got quite a bit of wind and where the weather isn't too cold. But it's not the kind of thing you want for the future. You want to be managing your system so that we've got more domestic resilience. You know, we can't just have a green energy policy. We also need a policy which delivers affordable energy and available energy. We used to put at the top of our energy policy list keeping the lights on as the number one priority.
Well,
Let's have a bit of that.
That's right, a bit of self-reliance. And when I was knocking on doors in the two by-elections just before Christmas, John, I can tell you that almost to a person, people are very pro self-reliance of energy. They don't want to buy energy from Putin or electricity from Macron. And actually, the vast majority want us to do what the Conservative manifesto in 2017 said it would do, which was create a shale gas industry.
Well, indeed, and the 2019 manifesto said that measures would be brought forward to this current parliament to get energy prices down. So again, as with not having national insurance rise, I'm urging the government to stick to our manifesto. I was pleased to campaign on the manifesto pledges on keeping taxes down and on what I thought was more measures to bring forward domestic energy. It's a craziness to link ourselves more and more into import dependence on the continent when the continent of Europe is energy short. It doesn't have all the oil and gas that even we've got. And it has limited electricity capability because the Germans are busily closing down all their nuclears and quite a lot of their coal stations. And the French nuclear fleet, which has served them and us pretty well, is now aging and has some technical issues. And so you can't rely on it, Richard.
It's utterly extraordinary to me, John, that Germany and France, which are very keen on heading towards net zero, that they're closing down a key element of reducing emissions, which is nuclear energy. Here we are promoting Rolls-Royce's small modular reactors, and yet France and Germany are essentially sort of doing the opposite, closing it down. It feels to me like
Germany is
madness.
certainly closing it down, and it's going to make it much more difficult for her and for the rest of Europe linked into the German system, which is another reason why we shouldn't be linked into that German system or dependent on it. I'm not so sure the French want to do without nuclear, but they've had some temporary closures for maintenance or whatever on their nuclear fleet recently. So they've got to think about what the next generation looks like and how much of that they're going to modernize or replace with new nuclear. But as we know, if you do it by big plants, it takes a very long time and they are incredibly expensive.
That's right, they certainly are. And I know that the Rolls-Royce small modular reactors, they've just attracted some funding. I think they've attracted a little bit of government loan or grant. Would that be, do you know, by way of an equity stake in a joint venture from the government or just by a grant?
I don't know, and I haven't taken so much interest in that. If they want to put in a fleet of small nuclears and think they can do so for the next decade, that's fine. But I'm concentrating on this decade, and whatever they do on nuclear, apart from the plant that's in build at the moment, nuclear is not going to solve our problem. Indeed, the one guarantee we have got that come 2030, even allowing for the new plant, we'll have less nuclear power in Britain than we have today, because we're closing all but one of the other ones that we've got. So we've got to fill the gap, even if nuclear saves us in 2035. And I'm asking them, what are you going to do for this decade? And that is about shorter term and cheaper solutions.
well, in a sense, the only way to fill the gap is gas.
It's gas, or maybe it's a bit more biomass. Maybe it's converting the 3 remaining coal stations, which they don't want to convert, into biomass. Maybe it's still keeping coal on standby, because it was actually coal that saved us in the last couple of months, where we had to open up all 3 old coal stations we'd still got. Thank heavens they haven't put a ball and chain through them yet, and I would urge them not to put a ball and chain through them until they got more reliable power.
That's right. And if we just focus on taxes as well, because you touched on the increases to national insurance, the other tax that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has in a sense stealthily imposed on people is freezing the thresholds, which of course affects the lowest earners the most.
Hello?
I may have lost you there, John. Yes, did you catch that? The question about whether or not on the income tax threshold that the Rishi has frozen the income tax thresholds, which therefore means that some of the poorest, the lowest earners, are actually paying more tax on their incomes.
Yeah, well, I'd rather he was putting the thresholds up at least in line with inflation, but I understand the problems he's facing, so it's not something I've been urging to do. I think the big things to get right are the taxation on energy and, above all, taxation on work, national insurance. And I think also he's probably making a mistake reversing the long-standing Conservative policy of trying to give us a competitive corporation tax rate, because all the evidence from around the world is that the countries who set the lower rates attract far more business and their revenues go up rather than falling. So I think you're giving money away by putting the rates up.
He seems to have forgotten that sort of traditional economic message, which is that lower taxes create higher growth, higher wages, and therefore more tax revenues in the medium term. Can you have a word in his show like here, John?
Well, I've been telling him and his friends this for a long time, but they obviously don't agree with me. I think they're on Treasury orthodoxy. And the other thing I've been trying to point out to them is we don't want to stick on Maastricht austerity. Now we're out of the EU. We shouldn't have an economic policy geared to state debt as a percentage of GDP as if we were still in the EU. I want a growth strategy coupled to a sensible counterinflation strategy. Those are the 2 priorities. We want more growth, less inflation. And I don't think a state debt variable helps very much in trying to achieve that.
No, we need to cut taxes and we need to cut unnecessary daft EU regulations, in my view.
That would be helpful.
So, John, thank you very much. Keep, please, knocking on the Chancellor's door, whispering in his ear, and hopefully at some point he may start to listen. That's Sir John Redwood, Conservative MP for Woking, with his thoughts on how to reduce energy bills, both short-term and medium-term, with the cost of living crisis, and how we create more growth. It's absolutely vital. It really is vital to the direction of our economy and the ability of people to be able to pay the bills, pay the taxes. And it's all summarised, isn't it, in those 3 words, eating or heating. It just shouldn't come down to that. Coming up, we're going to be talking about what's going to happen with the Channel migrant crisis after the tripling of numbers last year. We'll be speaking to Henry Bolton, OBE. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk on Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
This is your weather on Talk Radio TV. After a wet start, most of the rain will dry off, leaving some sunny spells, staying cold with strong winds. Now, looking across the UK today, it'll be largely bright and sunny. Some downpours will stay for Northern Ireland, but for the rest, a fine and cold day. As we move into the evening, skies will clear for many, leaving a cold and frosty night. Coldest in the north, with Newcastle seeing highs of just 1 degree. Stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
More taste, more flavour. Reach for the story. More outspoken.
Error 5092. Argument failed to start.
Talk Radio.
There's still a good argument for listening.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're into the last section of the third hour of me standing in for Ian Collins. And there's certainly lots of tweets still coming in. People, I think, are delighted by that interview I had with Dr. Clive Dix, the former chair of the Vaccine Task Force, and his views that we should stop testing completely within the next few weeks and treat it like flu. Absolutely fascinating. Lots of views also on the idea of decriminalising cannabis here in certain boroughs in London as a trial. But there is a 5 o'clock press conference from Boris Johnson. I suspect he won't be talking about decriminalising cannabis. He'll be talking about more COVID news, good or bad. Anyway, let's take a couple of quick calls. We've got Tony in Bournemouth. Good afternoon.
Hello, yeah. I'm on the car park subject. I'm coming from a different angle here. I'll probably be a bit unpopular.
Well, that's all right. Go for it. Don't hold back. It's a free country.
Yeah. Well, I thought you like, different views and, it gives a fuller picture. I used to be a car park attendant for several years for one of the largest car park firms.
You probably gave me a ticket, Tony.
Yeah, maybe. No, I wasn't a nasty person, right? But what I'm going to say is there's a hell of a lot of dishonest motorists out there.
Right.
They're all making out they're this and that. And the sort of thing they used to do, I mean, nowadays it's nearly all cashless, but in those days it wasn't. I'm talking about 7-8 years ago.
Yeah.
People used to put gone for change, right? They put that on their dashboard, gone for change. You think, okay, fair enough. So you come back in 20 minutes, half an hour, they're still gone for change. They're obviously trying to blag it. So you slap a ticket on them, because they're just trying to take the mick out of you.
Right.
Do you understand?
I get the picture. That
Yeah. It's a bit like tax in post. It's that old trick. That sort of thing.
The checks in the post.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, car tax used to be in post, didn't it? Before they changed it all.
But there has to be a balance, doesn't there, between essentially.
There has to be a balance. And also another thing is they're very. I mean, if it was a car parking free for all, it'd be total chaos.
Of course.
Because motorists are very selfish. A lot of them are extremely selfish. They'll park anywhere. They don't care if they cause an accident by parking on a junction or whatever.
But of course, there's a difference between parking on the road in junctions in dangerous spots and essentially
on private land.
If you're on private land and you're there very briefly or whatever, and then you're essentially used as a sort of cash cow. From these private parking companies or the landlord, and again, I think it's just that balance, isn't it?
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, but some people they're arrogant. They just totally break the law. They think doesn't appeal to me. I'm going to park here. Sod you. And then when they get a ticket, they start crying about it.
Yeah. Okay. Tony, that's great. Thank you for that. Just a quick one before you go. My original question at the start of the show: should we have a referendum on the government's net zero energy plans that I call net stupid? What's your view, Tony?
Yeah, I think we should have a referendum on that, because, it's not practical for a lot of people, is it?
It's not practical, it's not affordable, and it's not reliable.
I'm a pensioner, I'm going to be worried about when I open my next gas bill, you know what I mean?
Completely, I understand that. Tony in Bournemouth, thank you so much for that. That was Tony. He wants a referendum too on net zero. We're going to go down to Surrey, not too far from Bournemouth. Andrew.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, good. What would you like to say?
This furore over the nut we have as a mayor, and unbelievable. He doesn't have a mandate to interfere in the laws regarding drugs. Clearly, looking at his mandate, this is not part of it. It's again interference and making his.
Okay, so when you say that, Andrew, let's just drill into that, because actually in his manifesto to be re-elected as mayor last year, he did say he was going to set up a commission to look at drug laws, and I think it was either both decriminalisation and or legalisation. So in that sense, maybe he does have a mandate.
He doesn't. His mandate, as laid down by the Devolution Act Mr. Blair brought in for the mayor, is very clear. And he can set up any commission he wants to change names, streets, etc. He can't do it. He's wasting money, wasting focus, and calling people into what his role is. It's ridiculous. He should be called out for it and just do his job for once.
But part of his job, though, Andrew, is that he is essentially the Police and Crime Commissioner for London and therefore overseeing the Met. So in that sense, within that role, he has the mandate to discuss these things, doesn't he?
Yes, he can discuss, but the reporting of this for him and his PR around it is that he can change the law. He can't. He can set up a commission. He can discuss it. He can then deliver that the results of the commission to the Home Office, who can then move it along. That's the process. That is his mandate is not to change the law or the policing around Class A, Class B, etc. This is a guy that blamed white middle-class people for causing the crime which leads to the stabbing of all the kids, of the 31 that have died in 2021.
Yeah, so that's right. I think, as I understand, I did actually ask my guest, Ian Hamilton, about this, that because it's the way that he asked the police to respond to people who are caught possessing or smoking cannabis. It's in a sense how they're then treated in terms of the punishment or otherwise. In that sense, he's not actually changing the law. He's changing the response of the police to the crime.
Again, that's his interference in the policing of downscaling the way, that they react. And that is, again, out of this. If he does that, he's breaking his mandate for as police commissioner.
Okay, and, Andrew, I get the point. I'm not sure I completely agree. I think actually that he can't change the law, but he did have a mandate that he was elected on to look at this and to discuss it. I guess the question you're saying is he going beyond that? It is a press leak. Who knows? It's certainly got lots of people enthused and encouraged. And talking of enthusement and encouragement...
sadly, Jeremy Kyle is next.
Jeremy Kyle has just strolled into the studio, looking forward to his your show and another press conference from the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I never know whether, in fact, this is good news, which means I can sit around for an hour and do nothing and earn money. But I'm going to ask you, because you're a politician in the making. Has Boris Johnson, by default... You read the press... Did you read the opinion poll today?
Which one was that?
He's gained 5 points on the Labour Party.
I did see something
Christmas.
like that.
So by not going with what he wanted to go with and listening to the cabinet, by having a haircut and buying a new tie, everybody's saying today, Boris is back.
Well, do you
Stranger
believe it?
things has happened there,
Stranger things have happened, haven't
You
it?
can just imagine, though, for all the negativity, which I completely understand because I think it's of his own making, you can just imagine that he's woken up on New Year's Day and thought, I need to get my head out my backside and get fighting again. Do you know what I mean?
Well, he certainly does, because he got an absolute thumping in North Shropshire. And, I mean, actually, credit where credit's due, and it's not often I give credit to the Prime Minister, but he did make that call. I think he made it because of the, in essentially the backbone that the 101 Tory MPs forced upon him.
I think he was also helped by Drakeford and the wee one from Scotland, wasn't he? Because they were out to make him look idiotic.
Yes,
and in fact,
and we've got a live, real example ongoing, and I think history will show that he and the cabinet made the right call. But I don't think that changes.
I will suggest this though. I believe that Boris Johnson, the campaigner that he is better with his back to the wall. I wonder whether he's one of those people who, when he's out to cajole or get the public on his side, Brexit like the election night, maybe sitting there with an 80-seat majority, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Maybe if he has to go and scrap, we will actually have an interesting
I'm
time.
sure that's absolutely right, because as we know, he has an interesting relationship with the truth.
Yeah.
And when his back's against the wall, he will say anything to please anybody at any particular time.
It's almost like he's made more mistakes in a position of strength than he did. Do you understand what I mean? I think it's going to be fascinating.
It will be very interesting. I don't think that poll will sustain itself.
Having said that, though, by the way, I think there's only a press conference because Keir Starmer said something this morning. I think they're just basically playing politics, and I get an hour off.
Well,
if I'm honest.
Who knows? I suspect he's going to talk about more about the COVID update. There's no suggestion he's going to bring in any more restrictions.
No,
Certainly in terms of the deaths, the hospitalisations, the ICU
but he's
numbers,
got this right, hasn't he?
It does. In terms of ICU and deaths, he's got this right. There's obviously an issue that you probably talk about the shortage of staff in key public services, which is a massive issue.
But that's why they should bring I think they should bring the self-isolation days down.
Yeah, down from 7 to 5. What they're
without
doing
any
in the US.
shadow of a doubt,
Absolutely, and I think at the moment they're saying not. But they're very good at saying one thing and then turning it.
So we've not only got that, we've got Will the Duke of York. What will happen with him?
I mean, absolutely fascinating. We've had so much else to talk about. We haven't covered the Prince Andrew story, but if you just read the document, you think, well, that lets him off. But then the law works in mysterious ways.
And also, that's a technicality. That doesn't prove his innocence or his guilt, does it? That will leave the questions hanging up. And I cannot understand that a woman as wonderful as the Queen has been let down so badly, but I do not understand why he doesn't do something to protect his mother.
Big question. All that to come up, I guess.
Absolutely, and parking fines.
And parking fines. We talked about that.
Yeah.
Coming up, thanks to my production team. Thanks for listening and watching. Jeremy Kyle coming up after the news. You've been great. I'll see you on Sunday. It's Tice Talk at Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 4, I'm Nadira Tudor. The Prime Minister will hold a Downing Street conference after warnings boosters every 6 months aren't sustainable. Prince Andrew's lawyers are making their stand as Virginia Giuffre's deal with Jeffrey Epstein is made public.
Today, I want to introduce my contract with the British people.
And Sir Keir Starmer lays down plans to bring Labour back to power. The Prime Minister will hold a Downing Street news conference in the next hour. He'll be joined by Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance. It comes as the UK's vaccine regulator is warning that COVID booster jabs every 6 months is not sustainable. Sir Andrew Pollard, who helped develop the Oxford vaccine, says those most at risk should be prioritised instead. Meanwhile, several hospitals have declared critical incidents, meaning they can't provide services like cancer treatment due to staff shortages. Following warnings, the NHS is in a state of crisis due to COVID. The Royal College of Nursing has called for further restrictions in England without delay. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned considerable pressure on the NHS is likely to last for weeks to come and said it would be folly to think the pandemic was almost over. The Duke of York's lawyers are arguing that he should not be dragged into court as part of a civil sexual assault lawsuit against him. Prince Andrew's legal team are presenting their arguments to a judge in the US, rejecting claims that he sexually assaulted Virginia Giuffre 20 years ago when she was a teenager. Yesterday, a £370,000 settlement between Miss Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein was made public. It didn't name the Duke, but suggested any connected potential defendants could not be sued.
If he does escape judgment because the judge agrees with his lawyers, he's still got to face the court of public opinion, which at the moment isn't on his side.
Sir Keir Starmer has unveiled his plans to bring the Labour Party back to power, with focus on security, prosperity and respect. He accused the Prime Minister of not being serious and the Conservative Party of being unfit to govern.
But the British people do not like being taken for granted, and they do not like being treated as fools. A government which refuses to follow the rules it sets for the rest of us loses the moral right to set those rules.
And tennis world number one Novak Djokovic will compete in the Australian Open after getting a medical exemption from having a COVID vaccine. All players and staff at the tournament must be vaccinated or have an exemption granted. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Gold Talk. Kyle Talk.
Talk Radio.
Go the extra mile.
Jeremy Kyle at Drive.
Radio with a fight left in it.
Jeremy Kyle on Talk Radio.
Afternoon, my friends. Fantastic. 5 minutes past 4. Thank you to Richard Tice. Back Sunday morning from 10 a.m. My chair's a little bit low. I'm just going to go up. How are you? Thank you for tuning in. As ever, in the next 3 hours, our attempt to give you a radio programme that involves you and wants you to be part of it. As ever, the number 0344 499 1000 and the text 87222. Start with the word talk. Hello to straight away Isabel in Tring, who says, I'm absolutely knackered. I've done 3 loads of washing, catching up from Christmas, and I've gone up and down the stairs. Quite what that's got to do with anything, I don't know, but it's lovely that you're on board, Isabel in Tring. And we welcome back. I was bereft yesterday. I felt like I'd come to work without any clothes on. Peter Cardwell's back in the Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Well, Isabel in Tring can give you some clean clothes should you need them.
I'll do the jokes. You do the politics. How was Ireland? Northern Ireland.
It was great. It was really good. I had a lovely time and I slept loads. I did almost nothing. It was
You look really well.
Thank you. You do too.
Well, I don't. Mine was a disaster.
Was it?
My son had COVID and my daughter. Honestly, it was a nightmare. Absolutely. But you had a nice time. You worked so hard and we all love you and it's so nice that you're back. And did you like your Christmas present?
I did. My Christmas present was amazing. It was very, very funny.
If we weren't, we would. Do you want to explain what it was?
Yes, it's a calendar. It's a coaster. It's a notebook. It's all sorts of things with words to do with animals on them. So there are tits, there are boobies, and
melons
and beavers. So there we are. It's because we're all in primary school.
We are all in primary school without a mask on. Pete, welcome back. So much that we want to talk about. Let's kick off today. 5 o'clock press conference with Boris Johnson. Is this just politics? Because Keir Starmer earlier vowing to restore trust in politics if he wins power. Big speech at 11 o'clock. How did that go down? And is Boris just doing that to, if you like, come back at him? What's it all about this afternoon?
Well, I think both leaders are trying to start the new year with a very statesman-like performance. Of course, we've heard a lot over the past few days of Boris Johnson saying we've got to stick to Plan B, we've got to put masks on in secondary schools and secondary school children, which is, of course, very controversial.
Yep.
But also at this press conference where he's got the A-team beside him, Sir Patrick Vallance and now Sir Chris Whitty, who was given his honour there in the New Year's honours list, that they will be putting forward, I think, trying to encourage people to get boosters. There are 2 million slots this week that haven't been filled of people getting booster shots, but there's definitely a sense that he wants to stick to the plan that's there, not overreact to what's happening. And of course, many people getting Omicron, those huge figures, far bigger than we've seen before, but also the sense that it's just not as serious as the Delta variant and trying to kind of calm people down. But it's interesting, of course, you've had something like 6 health trusts, NHS health trusts, that said they're in sort of critical condition, they're in overwhelmed.
and there may be others that follow. But Keir Starmer this morning was trying to set out a stall, talking about trust in politics. He knows he can win on this.
He talked about a contract with the British people. He said he would offer security, prosperity, respect. All of that's great. You know, the moral authority the Prime Minister has gone, I'm the man, I'm into straight leadership and all of that. Interestingly, though, and I wanted to start with this, I think almost by default, Boris Johnson was in a position, I would say, 5 days before Christmas, where he was literally on the ropes. Now, by default, I absolutely accept that the backbench committee, the rebellion by 100 MPs, the cabinet, rumours were that he wanted to impose more restrictions and was pulled back from the brink. By not doing restrictions, by making himself and the country look a lot better than certainly Wales and Scotland have done. I see a poll today that says he picked up 5 of the 8 points and is only 3 points behind. I give you this as a New Year's thing. New haircut, new tie yesterday, only 3 points behind. Boris Johnson, as I just said to Richard Tice, is an absolute fighter when his back is against the wall. We always talk about the detail, we always talk about the man who lets things slip. Just sitting there with an 80-seat majority thinking, I don't have to make much of an effort. Maybe he's woken up in the new year and thought, you know what, I need to get back out there and do the job properly. You said to me repeatedly last year, this isn't the end. Maybe Boris Johnson could turn this on its head. Seriously.
I think he could. I think your assessment's absolutely right. He's someone who, when backed into a corner, as you say, comes out fighting. Never underestimate Boris Johnson.
Never.
He is someone who has had so many comebacks. He has been an incredible fighter, someone who's been written off so many times. And what's to say that over the last 10 days or so, as most of us have been sort of taking a bit of time to regroup and think about what we want in 2022.
I just got drunk. I don't know about you. I'm absolutely honest. I got absolutely drunk because all my kids were ill and I was knackered. So
well,
you did as well.
You didn't. So yeah, exactly. No, I didn't touch a drop. So So I think Boris Johnson has perhaps regrouped a bit and said, things have got to change. I've actually got to take this a bit more seriously and try and stop those unforced errors. Draw a line under that horrendous 6 weeks for him before Christmas. Keir Starmer knows he can win on this trust stuff. He knows, this language. Boris Johnson taking us for fools, Boris Johnson taking us for granted.
But the nearer we get to an election, that will not be enough to win the election. Then we need substance. And then all the questions are asked about how you would pay for this or how. I just wonder whether, it just seemed to me yesterday, right? Something he looked to me like he lit up a bit, if I'm being honest.
I think you're right, and Keir Starmer knows, in fact, he acknowledged this morning that just because people perhaps don't trust the Conservative Party in the same way as they did perhaps a year ago or 2 years ago in the 2019 election, that doesn't necessarily mean that their support migrates to Labour. So he has a big job of work to do. But I think if Boris Johnson can bring something back on the trust, can look more prime ministerial, can be more serious, then I think he can win.
Somebody said to me yesterday, which is quite interesting off air, and I was like, wow, he made huge and catastrophic mistakes at the end of last year. New baby, totally shattered. He looked shattered. Everything was going against him. Maybe he has regrouped. I don't know. Angela says, I'm so happy for 2022. The dynamic duo are back together.
Oh, that's nice.
And also, Bob in Camberley, Jeremy, Pete, do you think Boris should have gone to Trump's hairdresser? Or do we like Trump? That's an interesting one, isn't it?
I mean, has he got a hairdresser? I don't know.
I have no idea. He was supponoed yesterday, or subpoenaed.
That's
the
right.
Way to
That's
say
right.
it. So
yeah.
What else has grabbed your attention in terms of politics over the last few days since you've
over the
been
Christmas
off?
period?
What do you think?
Well,
Tony Blair's knighthood. Come on.
Yeah, that was definitely. 500,000 people signing a petition against it. Maybe they should go on a march and then he could ignore them.
This is wow. Non-political comment there. I will say this. I was interested. Andrew Pearce, a good mate of mine, wrote in the Mail today that this is the Queen at her cleverest. She spent 14 years avoiding giving him this award because patently didn't like the way he treated her over Diana's death and wasn't a particular fan of him.
Yes.
And has now given it to him at the last possible moment. And the people are going to rise up and say, Ma'am, you're wrong. And she'll have to take it back from him. Do you think he could lose? This could be talked about. Can this not be debated in the House of Commons?
It can be. Anything can be debated in the House of Commons. I'm sure it will be.
Your salary,
debated,
maybe?
But, I would hope so. So
Good.
we get an uplift.
I would hope so. I would hope so.
Definitely get it closer to yours. But
it's not about money, it's about people.
Yeah, whatever. Tell it to your bank manager. I'm just here for
I don't speak to my bank manager.
Oh, maybe he doesn't speak to you,
No,
or
he
she.
doesn't, no. Oh, no, he's about 11. Go on, carry on.
Anyway, no, the Blair knighthood has certainly been a big story, far more so. I mean, some people were talking about Emma Raducanu and various other people, but Tony Blair becoming a Knight of the Garter, that's a big thing. Interestingly, one thing that's been totally lost is that Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall...
I did this yesterday, and I think, and you're absolutely right, she got the highest accolade you can get, and I think that is a testament from the Queen about how she has seamlessly, however badly she was taught, she's done a fantastic job.
But the question as well, which was brought up by a newspaper reviewer a few days ago on my programme, actually, was fascinating. Jo Tanner, her name is, former media advisor to Boris Johnson. She said, do we think that Tony Blair has finally got his Knight of the Garter, which a lot of people were saying, why hasn't he got it? John Major had one, lots of other former prime ministers had one.
Who hasn't, by the way?
Margaret Thatcher didn't get one because she became a baroness.
Right.
She was a member of the House of Lords, but she wanted that. So the question was, did the Queen wait until Prince Philip died to give it to...
Well, because he didn't
Tony Blair?
Yeah,
because he clearly, over the Diana
If
stuff...
we're going down the royal route, what about this afternoon, Prince Andrew and the big court case?
This is massive. This is massive.
The really interesting thing here is that technically, and I am not sticking up for the Duke of York before anybody starts texting or ringing, they're right. When she did this settlement in 2009 for $500,000, why was Prince Andrew not mentioned? Why have you taken a settlement and you agreed you won't say anything and then come back several years? This doesn't take away from the fact that I think he's an idiot, an absolute idiot.
Yes.
And for a man who purports to be only interested in the fabric of the royal family and certainly his mother, he is destroying his mother on a daily basis. And his silence to me is deafening. If I'm honest, right?
Yes, it is.
No, Did you agree with that?
A lot of people deserve an explanation from him. I think the Newsnight interview in particular was a disaster for him and raised so many questions about. And I mean, the fact that people are debating over the weekend, does Prince Andrew sweat? I mean, can he give documentary evidence that he didn't sweat at that point? Because, I mean, this is an incredible...
My mother used to say, horses sweat, men perspire, and women merely glow.
Oh, very good.
They're dead now, but I remember that from a long time ago. Horses sweat, men perspire, and women merely glow.
Excellent.
What do you do?
Well, I think
Dave's like a horse, to be fair. A big old cart horse, to be fair.
Dreadful.
Yes.
My goodness. Well, you're a sleek.
Your dog, by the way, your rescue dog. Have you got
I've got a rescue cat.
Yeah,
Jack,
much the same thing. You can't call it that anymore. Did you see the news yesterday?
No, I didn't see that. What happened?
A think tank in Cambridge. I refuse it. They think it's wrong, disrespectful to call animals, and they're now to be non-four-legged human person beings.
Excellent.
I promise you.
Okay.
So you must no longer. You should be stroking
Jack.
Jack is a four-legged non-human person.
What a load of rubbish.
There you go. He's back. He's back with a bang. Peter Cardwell, we're so excited to have you back. So listen, just press conference. What time are we expecting it? What are we hoping for?
In about 45 minutes. So we've got Boris Johnson, Sir Patrick Vallance, and now Sir Chris Whitty. I would imagine they'll just talk about sticking to Plan B. Yep. They'll take questions about what's happened over the last few days. Of course, the numbers don't come through just that quickly because of the bank holiday, because of over the Christmas period and on the weekend as well. So the numbers may well go up. We may have an announcement about that, but I don't see any new restrictions coming.
Do you think he called it right?
Politically, yes. I don't know about the medical side of things because I'm not a scientist.
Wasn't that
but
interesting when
politically,
nurses today were saying, oh, come on, Boris, you need to, there's 6 hospitals really struggling.
Yeah.
I've had people say to me that during the flu pandemic of 2003, the NHS was right up against it, but you never heard about it. Yeah. I just think there is, by default, I'm going to be completely honest, he might well have found a slight way to garner a bit of support. But we'll let you know. Thank you to Peter for now. That press conference from 5 and coming next. An this is interesting, a Red Wall Labour MP, James Frith, used to represent Bury North. What does he make of Keir Starmer saying this is the time for Labour to govern? We're back next on Talk Drive.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV weather.
This is your weather on Talk Radio TV. After a wet start, most of the rain will dry off, leaving some sunny spells, staying cold with strong winds. Now, looking across the UK today, it'll be largely bright and sunny. Some downpours will stay for Northern Ireland, but for the rest, a fine and cold day. As we move into the evening, skies will clear for many, leaving a cold and frosty night. Coldest in the north, with Newcastle seeing highs of just 1 degree. Stay with us for more weather updates here on Talk Radio TV.
Talk Radio. Up front and bold as brass. Rev it up and rant it out. The nation's best debate. Loud, alive. A hippie to the hippie to the hip hop. Talk Radio.
The home of common sense.
Welcome back. Another one of those new jingles that I don't know where it's going to finish or where it's going to start. Dave is lining up our next guest as ever, my friends. If you want to be on, 0344 499 1000 is my telephone number. Text to 87222. Start with the word talk. Hello to Bob in Camberley, who says, Jez, Rodney, our four-legged friend, previously known as a cat. You can't call a cat and a dog anymore. He can't wait for some programme at 5 o'clock. He's ignoring you and he's gone upstairs for a kip. Excellent. My number one listener is, in fact, a cat that's gone upstairs for a kip. Next, so this morning, at about 11 o'clock, Keir Starmer made his first major speech of 2022 in Birmingham. At that moment, his party were leading the Tory government by 8 points. Boris Johnson had the most disastrous few weeks before Christmas, starting with the sleaze scandal and Owen Paterson through Partygate too. Really just a dreadful, dreadful time. Boris Johnson, he said so many things about it. He said he shouldn't be given an honour. He'd lost the trust. He'd lost the moral ability to govern. Of course, the real reason that Boris Johnson managed to win that majority at the last general election was this well-known red wall that he took all those seats in the north that had forever, Bolsover had been in the Labour Party since the 14th century, I think, to be perfectly honest. And everybody was amazed and shocked by that. My next guest is a former Labour MP for one of those red wall seats, Bury North. James Frith, welcome to Talk Drive. How are you, my friend?
Hi, Jeremy, and nice to speak to you. You're a bit of a legend. You might be the most famous person I've ever spoken to.
You're an ex-MP, man. What's the matter with you? You're an So on a serious note, let me do this slightly differently before we talk about Keir. You lost your seat in 2019. When you look back and you remember that campaign, were you surprised or did you see the writing on the wall that during the weeks leading up to the vote?
There was a sort of sad inevitability to the result, both in Bury North and nationally. In actual fact, whilst Bury North is deemed now a member of the then Red Wall, in actual fact, it usually goes pretty strongly the way of the country.
Yeah.
So we came pretty close to bucking or breaking that trend. We did buck it, but we didn't break it. But yeah, there was a sad inevitability to it.
What do you blame for that, Jeremy Corbyn? An unelectable manifesto? Looking back now, what do you say? Because I ask you that because I want to talk about how Keir Starmer, in your mind, is moving the party forward. What was it? Was it the Jeremy Corbyn factor? Was it Brexit? What was it?
There was definitely a Jeremy Corbyn effect. I'd be ready to acknowledge that same effect was seen by some as a plus in 2017, and then was a stretch too far in 19. And I think Keir this morning has begun to address a road back to government, a road back to winning seats like Bury North, by acknowledging some of the things that people found were put off by under Jeremy Corbyn.
I think what's really interesting is you can absolutely talk about Brexit and, you know, a very simple theory, get Brexit done, right? The majority of the British people had voted for that, whatever we think about it. But what was really interesting about the Red Wall seats from my point of view was that those were seats, James, that had always been Labour seats. And it was almost like, I'm not putting this to you personally, but I think this is relevant because I've heard this from many people. That was the working class vote. That was going to vote Labour forever. One of my dearest friends lives in Blythe, and he rang me that morning and went, Blythe's going Tory. And I went, get lost, man. What are you talking about? And he went, no, seriously, it is. People that would never have comprehended voting for not for the Labour Party said they've taken our vote for granted. So let's bring it forward. We had at the back of last year, with respect, about the worst 2 months in politics any Prime Minister has ever suffered. The sleaze scandals with Owen Paterson kicking that off, Partygate. And I think when we broke for Christmas, your party was 8 to 10 points ahead in national polls. And Keir Starmer, who I've accused of being about as interesting as, well, something that's not very interesting, had seemingly made inroads and turned a 10-point deficit into an 8-point lead by saying almost absolutely nothing because Boris Johnson kept slipping over his own feet. Today's Keir Starmer, or was Keir Starmer's attempt at convincing the British people that he is electable. He talked about crime and security, talked about the NHS, workers' rights, business rights. Is he the man to lead this country genuinely, James? Is there more? And I hate to make politics superficial, and I know all the criticisms of Boris Johnson. I've been sat here for months, but is there more to Keir Starmer that he manages to portray? Because he still doesn't grab me, and many people feel the same, my friend.
Well, I think the point is that there's a lot more to Keir Starmer than there is to Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson was famously called trivial in Keir's speech. I think today Keir began to address some of the issues that people were put off by at the last general election under the Labour Party, a sense that we didn't get everyday living in towns like ours. We didn't have an answer to it beyond a wishful manifesto, a list of things that we were telling the electorate they could have for nothing. And I think patriotism and being proud of where we live and proud of Britain, proud of Bury, these things matter. And I think one of the interesting lines for me in Keir's speech today, and I'm somebody who's spoken and written about him needing to show a bit more oomph, a bit more of the assertiveness that he readily talks about when he plays football in the Commons, behind the dispatch box, in a set-piece speech like today, is that I think he began to say, well, look, I'm proud of where we live, but we can do, we should do, we must do better than a self-serving Prime Minister and a divided Conservative Party that's causing no amount of harm to the country. Because
this to me is the point. But you lost the last election. You lost the red wall. This is an absolute point because Labour voters were saying to us they took us for granted. What's interesting is if you speak to a lot of northern workers now, and you'll know this, James, they'll say they've got more money in their pockets and they feel still, despite the Partygate things, that the Tories have shown a degree of care. For Keir Starmer, surely the big issue is this, and this is, I genuinely believe this is the problem for the Labour Party. How does he reclaim the voters, the working class voters in Bury North and Blythe and Bolsover, whilst appearing not to represent the metropolitan elite who sit in Islington, and you know this as well as I do, sucking on their kale smoothies, the Tony Blairites, right? Who ignored the working classes but managed to win 3 elections because they got all the voters in the Midlands to say he's got a vision. How does Keir Starmer appeal to both? That's surely the problem, isn't it? That's his challenge.
Well, that is the challenge, and it's pretty clear to me. You don't simply focus on a strategy that wins back the red wall because we were still well short of an electoral mandate to govern the country simply with the red wall being restored. So I take your point. I mean, the pride in Britain that he's talked about, as well as the proud record in government, is something to remind voters of. To your point about people feeling better off, I'm not sure who you're talking to, Jeremy, but people don't feel better off, actually. They can't get a doctor's appointment because of underinvestment, not just because of COVID. Wages are stagnant. Inflation is up. Energy prices are up. The government is quiet on all the issues affecting Britain away from COVID and doesn't have a plan to take us out of it. Plus, we've got a working people tax coming in April, national insurance and tax hikes for working class
Which
voters.
brings me to my next question.
Which
brings me to my next question very nicely. If you're correct, sir, why is it this morning I read that the Labour Party, and this is to me, and I'm sure it's a frustration to you. Are you standing again in Bury South in the next election?
Well, it was Bury North. It was Bury North, not Bury South.
All right, don't start. I just can't read. Will you be standing again, Smarty Pants?
If they'll have me, of course I will.
What I find astonishing, and you speak brilliantly, and I mean that with the greatest of respect, I really, really mean that. What I find extortionary is that 3 days before Christmas, you lead by 8 points. Boris Johnson is on the ropes by anybody's standards, by hook or by crook, and I think by default, he decides not to impose more restrictions. he gets into a position where Wales and Scotland try to pressurise him and he doesn't do it. The latest opinion poll says you've lost 5 points and you're only 3 points in the lead. By your admission, one of the most unpopular governments ever. By your admission, a Prime Minister that most people, it seems, don't trust. And yet people are saying, Peter Carball said it earlier, this guy, Boris Johnson, has always, when his back is against the wall, fought. Can you really see the Labour Party overturning an 80-seat majority?
I can definitely, but I think your assessment is accurate. I think it points to the challenge the Labour Party has. It's not a challenge that Keir is in denial of. I think one of the things for me is you don't have a. I'm a football fan. I'm involved.
Who do you support?
Well, Bury FC was formerly the
Gig
town,
Lane. I know.
Gig Lane and the loss. So we're trying to get a comeback there. And I miss, as many do, taking my family to Gig Lane. We're trying to remedy that.
You need to support West Ham. Just get real with your life. Carry on.
You throw me off now, Jeremy. Talking about football. Look, you don't. If West Ham were playing in a London derby, you wouldn't want David Moyes' plan simply be to rely on the own goals of the opposition or the team you're playing against. Keir Starmer knows this.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer knows it's not enough to simply be in receipt of the unpopularity of Boris Johnson. And that's why we've got to have a propulsion, a reason to come out and vote for Labour, not simply against the government. And that's why I think you start with the values around security, around prosperity, about respect. You talk then about in more detail on policy as we move towards the next general election. I think today was the start of that process. To your point about the kind of energising factor, I do think there needs to be some oomph in some of the delivery. But
Yeah.
I also think he's now got a great team around him to talk to the concerns of the British people, and Labour is back in business.
Well, listen, just to finish, and I genuinely mean what I'm going to say. We get back in politics because you talk brilliantly and you strike me as a good man. Ian in Leeds sums up a lot of text messages. Keir Starmer rejected a democratic vote by the British people. He will never, ever, ever be able to get past that, and he will lose. How do you respond to that, James?
Keir has made very clear he was the shadow Brexit secretary. Brexit has happened, but now we've got to make Brexit work, okay? The fact is, you've got a levelling up agenda that doesn't come anywhere near restoring the damage of 10 years, 12 years of Tory government. You know, we've had 110 million taken out of Bury. So what about restoring first before talking about levelling up? Getting a bit of money for some funding for local projects is not the same as rebuilding the fabric of towns.
Do you think he can
like
get
mine.
the British people to back him, them knowing the majority that he was against Brexit, I guess is the question. One final question for you. You'll love this. 10 seconds. Tony Blair to be knighted or not?
I support Tony Blair being knighted, yeah.
Do you understand the people that are against it?
Of course I do. In the same way I understand 1 million people marched. I was writing at the time about the 45 seconds, but the idea that one person is defined by one period of their life is for the birds for me.
Yeah, but people in your party have said that Thatcher's determined by the council tax when she did, the poll tax rather, when she did a lot of good.
I think Thatcher's lists of crimes against British public is a lot longer than Tony Blair's, that's for sure.
I think getting rid of the close shop was a good thing. Listen, an absolute pleasure. Bury's one of my favourite. Bury white pudding is amazing, people. Go to Bury Market. Don't just get black pudding, get white pudding. Fantastic. Really good speech to James Frith on Talk Drive. Right, don't forget that press conference. Boris Johnson and the two sirs, Vallance and Whitty. It sounds like a bed set, doesn't it? Your Vallance and your Whitty on your nice bed with your cushions. I don't know what I'm talking about. Back in a minute.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Nadira Tudor. The Prime Minister will hold a Downing Street conference after warnings boosters every 6 months aren't sustainable. And Prince Andrew's lawyers are making their stand as Virginia Giuffre's deal with Jeffrey Epstein is made public. The Prime Minister will hold a Downing Street news conference in the next hour. He'll be joined by Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance. It comes as the UK's vaccine regulator is warning that COVID booster jabs every 6 months is not sustainable. Sir Andrew Pollard, who helped develop the Oxford vaccine, says those most at risk should be prioritised instead. Meanwhile, several hospitals have declared critical incidents, meaning they can't provide services like cancer treatment due to staff shortages. following warnings for the NHS is in a state of crisis due to COVID. The Royal College of Nursing has called for further restrictions in England without delay. The Duke of York's lawyers are arguing that he should not be dragged into court as part of a civil sexual assault lawsuit against him. Prince Andrew's legal team are presenting their arguments to a judge in the US, rejecting claims that he sexually assaulted Virginia Giuffre 20 years ago when she was a teenager.
If he does escape judgment because the judge agrees with his lawyers, he's still got to face the court of public opinion, which at the moment isn't on his side.
And tennis world number one Novak Djokovic will compete in the Australian Open after getting a medical exemption from having a COVID vaccine. All players and staff at the tournament must be vaccinated or have an exemption granted. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense. People can say whatever they want.
Talk Radio.
Get a grip.
Raw talk, pure energy, more taste, more flavour, more outspoken than ever.
Clear-headed, honest opinion.
Lively debate.
Talk Radio.
Wow. Welcome back. 23 minutes to 5. 23 minutes from Boris Johnson's press conference with Whitty and Valance. That will come up at 5. We'll bring you the whole thing. He'll speak. There'll be questions. I'll get a cup of tea and then we'll carry on with the show. Actually, interestingly, Martin says, here we go again. Another press conference at 5 o'clock. So that can only mean another Boris Johnson U-turn, a lot of rubbish and lockdown on its way. I don't think it'll be that. We all believe, my friend, it will simply be we're going to continue with Plan B. Keir Starmer's had a chat. Now I'm going to have a chat. Peter Dawkins says, Jeremy, the Labour MP still couldn't answer Starmer going against the Democratic vote re-Brexit. Anyone that votes Labour can't be too surprised when we slide back into the EU. I'll never vote for them. And somebody else says, I will never again vote Labour as long as the present lot of bedwetting, self-indulgent money grabbers are in it. Interesting. People are really up for this afternoon. 0344 499 1000 is the telephone number here until 7 o'clock with Talk Drive. 87222. Start with the word talk. Now, of course, the other big news story today is we're awaiting that judgment moment. Prince Andrew's lawyers have brought forward a motion in the US to dismiss a sex assault civil lawsuit brought against him by Virginia Giuffre, of course. This has reached a point where this lady, yesterday, it was announced, it was revealed that she received $500,000 in a settlement with Jeffrey Epstein. The late Jeffrey Epstein was made public. The hearing that we're waiting for started at 3 o'clock. Is presided over by US-based Judge Lewis Kaplan. Now, Andrew, the Duke of York, has constantly denied the allegations, but apart from that has done nothing. His lawyers are saying because her settlement was you're done, you've said it, and you didn't mention us, we shouldn't be in the realms of you saying there should be something else. We shouldn't be defending ourselves. You never mentioned us before. You took a settlement. It's all over. This really is genuinely Prince Andrew's final hurrah. I mean, in terms of genuinely here, in terms of public opinion, I don't think he'll ever get it back over this side of the Atlantic. But this is a massive moment, and he can pin. We'll bring it to you soon. As we thought what we'd do is we get a guest on to perhaps explain the US legal system. David Weinstein is a former federal prosecutor. David, afternoon. Welcome to Talk Drive. Thank you very much indeed. Explain to me what is going on, if you can, right now.
Sure, Jeremy. They're engaged in pretrial motion practice here. This is all a preliminary matter. There hasn't been much discovery that's taken place. No one's depositions have been taken. They're demanding documents from either side. And what the parties are doing now, specifically Prince Andrew, is they're focusing on a settlement agreement that Virginia Giuffre entered into with Epstein back in 2009. And prior to another one she entered into with the estate of Epstein in 2020. And they're focusing on words in this settlement agreement. Now, keep in mind that this settlement agreement was entered into between Giuffre and Epstein and no one else.
But it does.
Not any other party.
But that's the interesting point, David, because the settlement with Epstein and Miss Giuffre referred to her by her unmarried name of Roberts, and it agrees to release, acquit, satisfy and forever discharge Epstein and any other person or entity who could have been included as a potential defendant. Now, whilst the settlement doesn't mention him by name, his lawyers say the deal means that she cannot sue him because presumably, because I'm not a legal person, they're saying that he would have been brought up in 2009 or 2020, that it's almost too little too late. It's an afterthought. Now, from this side of the Atlantic, of course, this isn't going to carry any political, this isn't going to carry favour with the British public. They're going to see him as guilty. But in terms of a technicality, he could get away with this, couldn't he? How do you expect it to go?
I don't think so. I expect this to go against him. I expect the judge to rule against him in this matter, and for two reasons. One, this is a similar argument that Ghislaine Maxwell made during her criminal proceeding based on the deferred prosecution agreement that Epstein had entered into, where they mentioned other co-conspirators, including but not limited to a number of names. And the judge in that case, another judge sitting in the Southern District of New York, ruled that Maxwell was not included in that statement because she was not at that time a potential co-conspirator. And I think that the judge in this particular case is going to have a similar ruling. Now, the judge today also handed an argument over to Giuffre's lawyers. And that was, there's another clause in this same document that appears halfway down the next page. And that one says that the terms of this agreement cannot be used by any other party outside of this lawsuit. And quite frankly, that is what Prince Andrew is. He is another party outside of this lawsuit.
I agree with that. And what's really interesting is, as well, from I keep going back to the moral stance of this, but in essence, you say it won't happen. But the interesting thing here, or should I say worrying thing, is that a judge could say, by allowing this, let's say, denying her the chance, he could be saying that guilt or innocence doesn't matter. You legally cannot bring this case. That doesn't, to me, I've always thought from the minute I heard this is an escape clause and a loophole and doesn't get to the real issue of what we're talking about. But legally, his team are saying, we weren't mentioned before, why should we be mentioned now? But still he doesn't stand up, David. This is the problem with people over here in the United Kingdom and say, I didn't do it or I did do it. And I'm going to take this woman on. It's all a bit shady, which tells us, in non-legal terms, that he's probably guilty. He denies it, I have to say that. But it's all a bit shady to me.
Well, that's the way the system works over here. If you're a plaintiff or if you're the government, you have to prove your case against the people who you are either filing charges against or have brought a lawsuit against. And so the burden's on you, in this case, as a plaintiff, to prove your charges. A defendant, especially in a criminal case, defendant has to do nothing. Government has to prove their case. In a lawsuit like this, a defendant has to do something. But very often what a defendant does is they wait until all preliminary matters have been settled. They don't make any statements public or in their pleadings until they have to, specifically about denying their culpability with regard to the charges.
Can I ask in layman's terms, David?
Sure.
You're a former federal prosecutor. For people listening, we followed this story for months. Prince Andrew has a reputation over here, and as I say, his team and he will say that he's innocent and a man or a woman is until proven guilty. How far do you, as an ex-federal prosecutor, think this can and will go?
Oh, I think it'll go all the way to the bitter end here. He's going to continue to take his denial all the way through discovery depositions, through any other arguments, either just prior to a trial, if a trial takes place, during the trial itself. It's going to be a classic defense of, I didn't do it, it's not me, I'm not admitting it, you have to prove that it was me. And in a civil case, you're going to have to prove by tilting the scales more than 50% that I was the person who did it. And you're going to have to convince the jurors that I'm the one who did it based on what you're saying. Now, he will at some point in time be deposed and he will have to answer questions, but I suspect he will continue to deny that he's done all of this. And will say that it is a situation of circumstances where he was in a certain place, but there is no proof that he did what's alleged to have been done by him.
I mean, this is a civil suit, right? So this is about money. This is about reputation. You say it will go all the way. He will be subpoenaed. He will be forced to appear. What, by video link? Would he have to do that?
Well, if he intends to defend himself in this lawsuit, he can't do it from afar. He is going to have to eventually sit down for a deposition. If he doesn't sit down for the deposition procedurally, he is going to be barred from raising certain defenses and proceeding forward. Right now, he hasn't appeared in the U.S. He hasn't had to have his deposition taken. And thanks to the current COVID pandemic, depositions are occurring by video. He could certainly sit for his deposition in England and they could depose him via some sort of a video link, and then that deposition could be used. But when this comes to the trial, he's going to have to travel over here. He's going to have to appear in the Southern District of New York, and he's have to subject himself to whatever's going to happen in that courtroom.
It's a horrific story for many people, and understandably what Epstein does was appalling. And we've watched the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and one of the big questions over here as well, and I'd just be interested in your opinion, David, is that facing 65 years and certain death in jail, will she bleed and be giving names? And of course over here we're talking predominantly all the time about the Duke of York, Prince Andrew. But Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, many others have been mentioned. This could be one of the biggest trials ever, couldn't it? One of the biggest fallouts from a trial ever. Ex-American presidents, for goodness sake. Royalty in the UK.
It certainly could be, but it's not entirely up to her. Look, I have seen many a defendant who, after being found guilty, suddenly sees the light and realizes that the only way to save themselves an eternity in prison is to start spilling who it is, who they were conspiring with. But the situation here is somewhat different. There's a couple of things that have to be considered. First of all, when people cooperate against other co-conspirators, they cooperate against people at their same level, or in other cases, against people who are at their same level. She has been viewed as the lieutenant, the second in command to Epstein, so she would have to testify against people who were at that same level. All of the people who you have named and who there are allegations against are people who allegedly were in cahoots with them and were receiving certain things, but they were not people who were controlling what was going on.
Well, let's be clear. Those
consider that.
names, you're right. Let's be clear. Those names have not been found guilty of doing anything other than being associated with her and thus dragged into this whole process.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with that. So what the government also has to look at is, do you believe Ghislaine Maxwell? She's a woman who did not take the stand, so she hasn't testified yet, but she faces a perjury charge. And so if she's going to cooperate, she's going to have to plead guilty to perjury. She's going to have to give up her appeal and cooperate fully with the government. And now you have a witness who is cooperating down against other people and who has admitted that she's lied under oath. How good a witness is that person, and how valuable is the information she's giving to the government that they're willing to let her cooperate?
Fascinating, and really, really appreciate you joining us. And actually, you're the first person. I mean, I, as I say, from layman's terms here, I've watched this. I mean, the Duke of York, I'm a royalist, okay, has always had this sort of, I don't know, there's something about him. He's always been the Queen's favourite. He always seems to have been this sort of loose cannon. I think this is upsetting for her in many ways, but I think it's a massive story. And David Weinstein, thank you so much indeed for joining us, ex-federal prosecutor, live there from the United States of America. That result, by the way, Prince Andrew, the legal civil suit legality that we're waiting for, that is coming up. Boris Johnson, of course, that press conference with Whitty and Vallance at 5 o'clock. All of that on Talk Radio. Peter Cardwell back as well. And in 9 minutes, I get to put my feet up. Back in a minute.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio. Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
Big name guests and a truckload of topical emissions.
Jeremy Kyle.
Radio with a fight left in it.
Jeremy Kyle.
On Talk Radio.
Don't forget that press conference. Boris Johnson and the two sirs, Vallance and Whitty. How do they? It sounds like a bed set, doesn't it? Your Vallance and your Whitty on your nice bed with your cushions. I don't know what I'm talking about. Sorry, I beg your pardon? That was obviously something I said before that sort of replayed on me. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. No idea. God, do I sound that completely confused? 0344 499 1000 to the phone lines. West Sussex. William, not long before Boris speaks again, so we'll get you on for a couple of minutes. What would you like to say on Talk Drive?
Yeah, hi Jeremy, how's it going? Another happy hammer to another happy hammer.
Are you an Australian happy hammer?
No, I've never been to Australia, but I once, about 30 years ago, put an Australian accent so this girl from Finland would go out with me because she didn't like the English, and it worked. So I had to spend 2 weeks pretending I was from Queensland.
But you sound Australian. You're from West Sussex. You support West Ham, and the only reason you've got an Australian accent is because 30... Anyway, never mind. What do you want to say, pal?
It's about Keir Starmer's sudden newfound patriotism. So what I really would like the media, the people in the media, such as yourself, to actually now ask Sir Keir to explain why he doesn't like being called Sir Keir. And if he doesn't like being called Sir Keir, he should just hand it back.
It's really interesting, by the way. And James Frith, the ex-Bury North MP, alluded to this, and I thought he was excellent. He said that the Labour Party just can't try and reclaim the Red Wall. They need to talk to the metropolitan people, in London, and it's a difficult job. If you remember Corbyn, he didn't want to go to the cenotaph or wear a tie or wear a puppet. He didn't want to do anything, did he? He didn't believe in patronage or sirs and everything. And the next leader of the Labour Party is in fact a sir, who now, by appealing to everybody, doesn't use it. It's absolutely true. Peter Carball's here, our political editor. That's fair enough comment, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. You've also got Sir Ed Davey, who is the leader of the Liberal Democrats, who doesn't like being called Sir Ed
Well,
either.
turn your knighthood away then.
But it's interesting, you've got two of the main opposition parties, Sir Ed Davey and Sir Keir Starmer, and then you've got Mr. Boris Johnson.
And they're saying Boris shouldn't get an award.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, Keir Starmer said that this morning, and when he was asked by journalists, he said he wasn't deserving of the award of Knight of the Garter. And of course, there are something like 500,000 people who signed a petition against Sir Tony Blair getting it. He doesn't want to be Sir Anthony, but Sir Tony. It also feeds into the fact that who deserves honours, and also are they really anything that has any meaning in our society anymore? Is a knighthood really something?
Well, can I just say thank you, William in Sussex. Appreciate your call. We're just waiting for this press conference. The whole knighthood thing with Tony Blair, I understand both sides. I mean, I listened to Lindsay Hall, the speaker, who said that actually, if you do that job, it's such a hard job, and you should be awarded that for doing the job, whatever your politics. There's an argument that says that's right. I thought one of the greatest things this year was awards, not knighthoods, to the people who had worked so hard through the pandemic. But there will always be criticism of it. Would you scrap it entirely, or do you agree with the honour system?
No, I think it's a great system. I think it's a nice thing. Although the problem, I suppose, is where you draw the line, because there are people who have just made Mick Jagger, for example, is a knight. Sir Mick Jagger. He has made loads and loads of money doing his job, and the question is, should you give it to people for doing their job, or should you give it to people because they've gone far and beyond, either in their job or in some other way? Chris Whitty, for example, would be expected to get a knighthood because he'd been the chief medical officer. His predecessor was a dame. So the question is, should he get that for everything extra he's done? Should he not get it because people say he hasn't done a good job, some of them, or some people say he's done a fantastic job? So it's there's no rhyme or reason to it. There's some countries like Ireland, for example, that don't have any honours at all.
There's no honour in Ireland. There's no honour in Ireland. I love Ireland. It's one of my favourite places in the world, and I mean that's a wonderful place. James, we were talking to James Frith, the Bury North MP, and he disagreed with me when I said that actually a lot of people in the Red Wall seats will say that they've noticed a change since the Tories won the seats. Another James says Labour can't be trusted up north. We will never forget the Brexit vote. I will never vote for them again. We do have more money in our pockets because wages are up, because we can't import cheap EU labour. I think that's a relevant point, don't you?
Definitely, and there's a lot of people will say this is really the early stage of Brexit. It's only been a couple of years since we properly left the EU, and it will take a while to see what the outworkings of that are. Certainly in terms of Brexit, Sir Keir Starmer was the shadow Brexit secretary. He was talking about a second referendum, and a lot of people will remember that. They will remember that Boris Johnson, for all his faults, was the person who said get Brexit done, and most people who were, whether they agree with Brexit or not, at that stage, because of everything that was going on politically and how difficult it was, were saying yes, let's just get through this. Let's stop all the what was called dither and delay and all the rest of it.
It's interesting because a lot of people would have said some weeks ago, for example, this one, I, like many, refuse to listen to any words that trio of liars, Johnson, Vallance and Whitty, have to say. I switch off. And when you come back, I'll come back on. Quite how they'll know when I come back on, I've got absolutely no idea. But interestingly, that vibe that we were talking about, and ours is to be politically straight down the middle, okay? But you look at that opinion poll and you look at some of the comments to you today and you learn, and you're a political animal. Politics is very fickle. You can go from being on your backside, you make a good decision or a popular decision, and suddenly you're back. back.
Yes.
And I just feel, and you know far more than me, what I said earlier is true. I think Boris Johnson might well surprise a few people in the next few months, whereas 3 weeks ago I might have been saying to you, he was toast, man.
I think the problem for Keir Starmer is to try to fill that gap and to say, OK, there's been a major issue. You talked about trust in politics today. Will people really remember Owen Patterson? Will they remember that name? Will people remember?
Do you know, but they will remember Brexit. I'm promising you absolutely, but not Owen Patterson. They'll probably remember Partygate.
They'll probably remember Partygate
and
as well.
second jobs, but the Labour Party were as in that as everybody else.
Yes.
I don't know. It's to me, and you worked in it. It fascinates me.
Yeah.
It fascinates me how, when his back was against the wall, Boris, and he was being battered every day, did nobody go to him like you and say, "You need to front up here"? Or maybe they did, and maybe said, "This will pass. We've got Christmas coming. Let's I'll get a haircut, buy a tie." I know I'm joking, but I'm being literally that shallow. People are saying, "Look, he looks like he's turning around." Well, because he had a bloody haircut. How does that make a difference?
Well, it's a lot about what resonates as well, and also the fact that we may well be 2 years away from an election. Of course, the big election that Boris Johnson will have to fear is the May local elections, because if he does really badly there will be people out for his blood. But if he can turn things around between now and May, and those don't go too badly, I think Labour will probably win and will gain more seats than the Conservatives will in the local elections.
We can't talk about it, but there's one big issue, but there's many issues that people want to talk about Starmer and the Labour Party. I think you know what I'm alluding to. And that will come out, and the papers haven't even started. I think Boris Johnson has brought a lot of this on himself, and I think that he maybe needed or has had somebody, or maybe he's just come to it himself. I thought you said something very interesting at 4:00. It's almost like he needs to take it seriously. Yeah. Maybe that's part of I'm used to it, I know I'm it. I don't know. But I almost, a lot of people disagree with me, I hope he does come out all guns fighting, because I want to see and hear from both parties what the future holds. I liked what James Frith said. I don't want Keir Starmer to have to say nothing to end up in the House of Commons with a majority, because that's not what you should vote for, the mistakes of others.
You should have to win it. And whether you love Boris Johnson or whether you hate him, he will be the Prime Minister for probably the foreseeable future, probably at least until May. That may not happen, of course, but it looks as though it will. And we are either loving having him or stuck with him, depending on how you look at it. So you want him to come out fighting. You want him to be.
Can I just just so we've got the picture up? We're waiting for Whitty, Valance, and Johnson. Those three what are they called? Three. Sorry, what? Three what? No, they're not podiums. I'm talking about three amigos. And you said podiums, you idiot. Hombres, that's it. I was trying to say hombres. Do you know what David did to me today? Can I just point this out as Boris Johnson's about to come out? We're in the canteen. I say restaurant, it's hardly a restaurant, right? And I'm talking to somebody, and I open my mouth to speak, and he literally puts his hand up and says, "Forget this," and carries on talking. I'm this now. I'm this. Ignore this, he said.
That's the relationship you want with your producer, definitely.
I think he's more than a producer. I think he's a blot on the landscape of life. Talking about awards, I think there should be an award for you. I was very surprised. In the Wireless Group Awards, did you not win anything before Christmas?
I did not.
Here they are. And how about that for timing? Boris Johnson, Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance live on Talk Radio.
Thank you very much for joining us. Our United Kingdom is in the midst of the fastest growth in COVID cases that we've ever known. Previous waves of the pandemic didn't have a single day with more than 100,000 new cases reported. One day last week, we had 200,000 people test positive. And the latest figure today is another 218,000, though with that includes some delayed reports. So anyone who thinks our battle with COVID is over, I'm afraid, is profoundly wrong. This is a moment for the utmost caution. But our position today differs from previous waves in two crucial respects. First, we now know that Omicron is milder than previous variants, so while hospital admissions are rising quickly, with over 15,000 COVID patients now in hospital in England alone, this is not yet, thankfully, translating into the same numbers needing intensive care that we saw in previous waves. Second, thanks to the fantastic national effort to get Britain boosted, we now have a substantial level of protection, higher than any of our European neighbours, with over 34 million boosters administered, including in England, reaching more than 90% of the over 70s and 86% of the over 50s. And so, together with the Plan B measures that we introduced before Christmas, we have a chance to ride out this Omicron wave without shutting down our country once again. we can keep our schools and our businesses open, and we can find a way to live with this virus. But the weeks ahead are going to be challenging, both here in the UK and across the world. There is no escaping the fact that some services will be disrupted by staff absences. But we've been working through Christmas to prepare for this wherever possible. And if we all play our part in containing the spread of this virus, the disruptions we face can be far less severe than a national lockdown, with all the devastation that would bring for the livelihoods and the life chances of our children. So, the government is acting to protect critical national services, to keep supply chains open, and fortify our NHS to withstand the pressures ahead. We've identified 100,000 critical workers in areas from food processing to transport to our border force, and from the 10th of January, we'll be rolling out lateral flow testing for all these workers, available on every working day. We'll be sending testing kits directly to these organisations and liaising with them on the logistics. We've asked qualified teachers who have left the profession to come back and help fill temporary absences, and I want to thank them and all teachers, parents and pupils for taking the precaution to test yourselves and to wear a mask in the classroom, enabling vital face-to-face education to continue. We're increasing NHS capacity by building on-site Nightingale hospitals, as well as creating 2,500 virtual beds where people can be safely treated at home. We've bought more antivirals per person than anywhere else in Europe. Those are the tablets which reduce your chances of going to hospital once you've caught COVID. We're mobilising our volunteers, the emerging territorial army of the NHS, and we're working to identify those NHS trusts which are most likely to need actual military support so that this can be prepared now. As our NHS moves to a war footing, I will be recommending to Cabinet tomorrow that we continue with Plan B, because the public have responded and changed their behaviour, changed your behaviour, buying valuable time to get boosters in arms and help the NHS to cope with the Omicron wave. So please, carry on observing those measures for now, work from home if you can, wear face coverings on public transport and in indoor places, and take a test before you go to a high-risk venue or meet those who are elderly or vulnerable. And of course, follow the relevant rules if you live in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. Above all, if you haven't already done so, please get that booster. Since I launched the Get Boosted Now campaign on the 12th of December, we've delivered 10 million extra boosters across the UK. We've doubled the rate of vaccination from 450,000 doses a day to a peak of more than 900,000. We matched the NHS's previous record day and then beat it again and again, and we met our target of offering a booster to every eligible adult a whole month early. The freedoms we're able to maintain in the teeth of this Omicron wave have been made possible by the number of people getting boosted. And I want to thank again everyone who assisted in this extraordinary national effort over Christmas. Our GPs and their teams, pharmacists, everybody in our fantastic NHS, the thousands of volunteers, the ingenious initiatives of local communities like the one in Redbridge Town Hall, which vaccinated 1,700 people on Christmas Day, and every one of you who has come forward and done your bit by getting jabbed. But there are still almost 9 million people eligible who haven't had their booster. And it's absolutely heartbreaking that as many as 90% of those in intensive care with COVID have not had their booster. And over 60% of those in intensive care have not had, with COVID, have not had any vaccination at all. People are dying needlessly because they haven't had their jabs and they haven't had that booster. And there are 2 million booster slots available this week alone. It's already the